Thank you. Wait a minute now, you're supposed to be doing this out of the goodness of your heart. Did you see anything interesting in the hood?
Did you want to start at the bottom?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
No. Okay.
What, I drove through Grove as well. And that was more enlightening. I hadn't been there in a while. I was what I remember.
But you get my drift now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good job. That was the object.
Welcome to all. I see 5 p.m. And I see quite a few people here. Thank you for that. I would like to get started on the agenda. We said 2 hours. Is it going to be 2 hours?
Please.
We'll see. We've got really a lot to talk about. I had a suggestion from one commissioner that we approach everything backwards, which I thought was funny. So that is my suggestion, unless you see concern.
What was it? Me.
We'll start with the least complex things and get more complex as we go. There are trade-offs.
We'll start with sitting in chairs.
Like that suggestion.
It's
Move
really
on to
complicated.
more advanced topics.
Oh,
Starting with sitting down.
Did we get that on camera?
Oh my God!
He's got that on.
I can't wait till that makes a daily progress.
What are you trying to say with that one?
Put that in the minutes.
That he was fed up and it was just too much.
Understood. So my proposal is that we sort of, on every issue, we kind of do a round robin. And if you want to talk on each issue, you're welcome to. If you don't, that's completely okay.
We literally gonna go down to the street.
Is that
150.
Oh, it says, okay.
That was her piece.
I see. Thank you. Actually, really will try.
I know you will.
Mr. Freese, do you have information for us on Module 3? We'll talk about that?
I do. I was actually going to kick that to the end so we get right to the mapping. But so I'll just say for right now, and we can come back to Module 3. But we anticipate releasing Module 3 tomorrow. And as we've done in the past, that'll include a video presentation, an executive summary, and then the Module 3 document itself. Yeah. So that's an update. I got some highlights from it, but I figured we'd dig into the map first if you want.
That sounds wise to me.
Great.
Starting from the bottom, I believe our first item is transition issues. Can you speak to that?
Sure. I mean, so this was recognizing on our part as we looked at a lot of the comments we were receiving around mapping issues. We're dealing with transitions between higher intensity areas and lower intensity areas. This is an issue that we had committed to addressing early on, and our existing transition language really is intended to address where lots kind of back up or side to side, where lot lines meet, and wasn't really addressing across streets, for example. We got comments on that issue, and some of the comments we received during one of the open houses as well kind of spoke to the issue of elevations. So right now, our consultant team is doing a deeper dive into addressing transitions across streets. We're going to look at that in 2 ways. One is potentially looking at it from the perspective of rules, as we've done similar to the rules we've already adopted into or already proposed in the second module. But the other one would be actually looking at, do we actually make changes to some of these zoning districts to lessen the degree of difference between districts facing each other across the street. So as an example, in the north end of the Greenbrier neighborhood, right on Rio Road, there's an example of I believe it's CX5, that's really intended to orient towards Rio. And, but then you have a transition across Tarleton Street on the backside to a residential district. And so we're looking at making a zoning district change on the Tarleton side of the Grove lots. So then the other example is looking at very, very steep slopes where we might have a scenario where, I'll use the CX5 as an example. CX5 is perfectly appropriate on the street below the grade, but at the top of the grade, you have a different adjacent zoning district and you wouldn't necessarily want a CX5, a 5-story building at the top of the grade, both because of the houses or neighborhood across the street, but also the scale of building you're now putting at the top of a high grade. And in those scenarios, we're actually looking at the potential of doing split zoning, which typically we would avoid, but it might be appropriate in these scenarios. So those are the strategies that we're looking at and doing kind of a review of the entire zoning ordinance on those, zoning map on those ideas. So why don't I take questions on those?
Just for my own understanding, could you explain the concept of split zoning a little bit more?
Sure. Well, so generally, you want one lot to have the same zoning district, right? You don't want a single lot to be subject to different set of rules. But this steep slope scenario might be a place where we actually would consider, from a policy perspective, that a split zoning makes sense. So on the lower end, you would have one zoning district, and on the higher end, a different zoning district.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Great.
Anything more on that? For me, I think it just makes sense for a street-focused approach, which I think is consistent with what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
I'd like to move along to zoning map inconsistencies with other adopted policies.
Yes, all right. So in this category, there were two things that we were looking at, both of these responsive to comments we received. I think the more expansive one was looking at our historic districts. And well, generally, because the BAR has review responsibilities over those districts and can, with the support of the guidelines that they have, so in implementing the guidelines for each historic district, they can specify a lower height or other design or massing characteristics relative to new construction to make it consistent with the historic context. But we also recognized that it didn't strike us as good policy to have extreme differentiation between that historic context that we've identified by policy, by adopted ordinance, that we want to preserve, and the zoning ordinance, the proposed zoning ordinance, having that be a much substantially greater height or density. So we did a review to see how many of those places might exist, and we only really identified the downtown and the north downtown as places where that might exist. The north downtown, we're suggesting that in the area along High Street, that's zone CX5, that then it might be more appropriate to zone that for CX3. In downtown, we think there's text changes that we should be considering that are similar to the text changes we have in the existing zoning ordinance, requiring step backs. So that's where the building at a certain height steps back away from the street, and using those tools plus the existing BAR review to regulate that historic context. Was that clear as mud?
I think I understand, but I'd like to go around. So, Mr. Mitchell, could you start us?
I'm good.
Mr. Durancio? Mr. Habab, are you with us?
No.
Ms. Russell?
I don't know. I've not really caught up to speed, honestly, so seems like it's throwing a lot at us.
Mr.
We're
Schwartz?
talking about zoning map arrows, right? We're talking about.
Inconsistencies.
Yep.
So specifically the historic districts, right?
And
Yes.
specifically the historic districts, yeah.
I was hoping to get some input from Ms. Russell and Mr. Schwartz on that, but.
I mean, we kind of glossed over the specific inconsistencies around the BAR, some of the concerns that Carl raised, weeks ago, and so.
So, well,
Well, one question because you identified north downtown, and you're speaking specifically of the north side of High Street, correct?
Yeah.
The south side is still CX8, right? I think that's what it showed up on the map.
I believe so, yes.
So then are we gonna have an issue with, personally, my
Yes.
opinion is just let the BR do their thing. We've got no problem telling people that, they can't put a 5-story building on a site if there's a historic house on it. On the downtown, I think we've had more problems with a regimented step-back requirement because it makes for funny building structures.
Sure.
And I think in most cases, the BAR has actually reversed that if someone asks for an SUP to change that. It also, the BAR could determine the historic chunk of the building that we want to preserve extends so far back. And if you give us a regimented, like it must be 25 feet back, it kind of negates our process. So the landmark, or Dewberry, or whatever it is an example of, I think, what could be a good example, and it's a natural place for the building to become a high-rise. And I think we could do similar things across the mall.
Do you want to respond to that?
No, I'm just,
Mr.
I
Stolzenberg?
get it.
So I think what you're saying about historic districts and the BAR seems reasonable. My qualms are more about the High Street proposal. Are you talking about all of the CX5 on High Street, or?
All of it within Carl
current north
correctly identified it, within the ADC district on the north side of High Street.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty much all of it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess if you listen to Carl and say, don't change it, and the BAR controls this, fine. But if you're gonna change it, I would say, you know, this area of CX5 on the west side of High Street makes more sense to reduce to CX3. This area here, it's like, you know, adjacent to detached homes, lower scale neighborhood area. The ones on like this blob over here, not so much. Those are more commercial structures, surface parking lots. I think it's fine to change these. I think it's a bad idea to change this.
Mr. Palmer?
I don't have any questions.
For me, I did a walk around High to kind of get a sense of this. I'm concerned because we're allowing some very tall buildings on the south side of High.
Yeah.
And I'm worried about the facing light
Sure.
element there.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's all still controlled by the BAR. That's
Yeah.
the point. And on the south side, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember now from a conversation that was a while ago, but I think there are a number of institutional buildings and such on that side, and so we were less concerned. What we were really thinking about are what Rory just identified, which were the lower scale, largely single-family in character, not necessarily occupancy, structures on the north side of High Street.
Mr. Payne?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of hard for me to provide feedback because I'm unsure what specific text changes would result in accomplishing this, but I guess at a higher level policy goal, it would make sense to me to be thinking about the context of historic districts in terms of the scaling of it. As others already mentioned, I don't know exactly what to make of it because there's some instances where I think around the downtown mall, for example, that step backs could be useful. There's other instances where it's almost if you had a taller structure like the Altamont Circle apartment, it's just a random example where if you just had a simple brick building material, like no setbacks actually make it look more in character with the area. I don't know how to.
Now, and you're really kind of reinforcing Carl's point here, which is the BAR can handle this issue in some respects.
Yeah.
Speaking for you, is that true?
I hope so. I believe so. There may be some disagreement, but I believe so.
Yeah, so I guess just very high level policy, I'm okay leaving discretion, level of discretion to the BAR. And I do think it makes sense to be thinking about the context of historic districts
Right.
in terms of massing scale and also building material. So but I don't know what specific text changes best accomplish that, I guess.
Yeah.
Mr. Pinkston?
Yeah, I don't have more to add than what's been said. I'm still thinking through what I've heard, so.
Ms. Breyer?
I can agree with what Mr. Payne said and Mr. Schwartz. I see both of those.
Mayor Snook?
I'm curious, because I'm not quite sure I know where you were talking about when you were talking about south side versus north side of High Street. Are we talking about going down the hill? Are we talking about still up in the Court Square area?
Court Square.
Well, and Court Square, but really it is down more west side of High Street. Yeah, we're gonna zoom in here on the map. The lines were a lot straighter in my version. we
It's
go.
loading.
Still the laser pointer?
I've never seen it do that before.
Don't blind me.
It's really, actually, my impression is Park Street east for the length of High Street.
From Park Street East.
Yeah.
What I thought were, McIntyre to Village, I thought we were.
Well, tell me, where do you think?
I mean, that's the part that, I thought that was the part that we were discussing, is where the single-family houses are.
The CX5, but there's CX5 at Park.
So
as
this
well.
lighter color is the CX5, right? So it's these guys, and then it's those guys.
Right.
So
Sorry.
further west, it's churches, and further east, it's courthouses, and there's a mixed-use sort of building that covers the whole block there, I think, Queen Charlotte, Queen Anne.
Queen Charlotte.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
As Rory pointed out, like, maybe I'm just reiterating, the ones that are to the east are already surrounded by the CX3. They've got a, is that?
Yeah, like that's
So-
a church, and then, or that's a
Those
church,
over
and that's a
there.
church parking lot.
But if you come down, let's come down back to High Street again. So CX5 there on Park Street, if you picture that in your head, that's a row of single-family style houses that are now occupied by offices. And then as we go east up High Street, it's the same.
Go west, you mean?
I'm sorry, west, I apologize, I was saying east.
Go west, young man, go west.
There we go. That's, therein is the confusion, sorry.
Those are mostly two-story.
Yes, they are.
So, okay, so those are CX5 and CX8. Wow.
What are the chances of them ever going back to residential?
Well, I don't think there's a lot of likelihood that that office building is gonna get torn down and suddenly 8 stories are gonna go there.
No, because that's gonna, require wheelchairs.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, I don't have a strong feeling about what ought to go there, but 5 stories, right next to the ostensibly historic area seems like a tad much.
Right.
And a little,
This one is 3.
I guess connected, maybe a little broader. One of the things we've obviously gotten a lot of feedback on is even outside of some of the areas you've identified right now, the concern that the experience of being on the downtown mall, the size of structures, creating a different visual impression when you're on the downtown mall directly and kind of crowding things out. Beyond even just the ideas you've identified, what is the approach to kind of evaluating that with anything, particularly in like the pedestrian view shed of being on the downtown mall? Is the goal that like the BAR is the body that is primarily evaluating what, if any, impact that would have?
Yeah, so the BAR is charged with enforcing their guidelines, and their guidelines are speaking to consistency and compatibility with the historic context, generally. I don't know, Carl, you can add anything to want to add in. Now, I think one of the charges that we have is we need to update all of the BAR guidelines. And in doing so, make probably stronger policy statements about things like protecting the view shed down the mall and stuff like that.
And I guess a question for Commissioner Schwartz, do you feel like the BAR at this point has the tools and guidelines that you feel are sufficient to accomplish that goal for areas adjacent to the downtown mall? That are, I guess, the best word I could think of within the view shed of a pedestrian there.
I guess I'm a little confused when you say areas adjacent, so we're talking like between the downtown mall and High Street. Is that what you're saying is adjacent, or?
Sort of. I guess I don't know the best way to clearly define it, but just any area where if you're on the downtown mall, a development within that world could impact when you're on the downtown mall as a pedestrian, what the area around you kind of looks like. I don't know if that clarifies it.
I mean,
Not really anywhere that isn't on the downtown mall, right?
I mean, I believe we do. There is always the pressure, we're gonna get pressure that if someone can put a 10-story building up, they're gonna make a really strong argument to be able to do that. And we're gonna hope that if we shoot them down or we tell them, no, you have to step back 30 feet because that's the historic building that's there and then you can build behind it, we're gonna hope that we have your support. And as long as that's working, then yeah, the BAR has the tools they need.
And the other question I have, I guess, one of the things I've heard from people sometimes is that the step back requirements, as well as the requirements in terms of different building materials, result in buildings that almost look even more out of character with the historic district than if you just had a simpler brick building material, simpler design, I guess. Do you feel like that's something the BAR is mandated to always like look at, or has that just been the policy preference of the body?
So the different materials, I think you're talking about the standard. Is that an example that would be?
That could be one, or the building where McGuire Woods will now move into. I mean, in my mind, sticks out as one that's just.
Which one is that? I don't
It's
know.
by what is it,
On
like
Garrett?
323?
323?
Garrett.
Yeah.
Garrett is not in our purview.
Okay.
So I think we,
Yeah.
we do, the stripey building aspect, I think we know that that's not a good idea. And step backs, it's all dependent on the location. For example, the Artful Lodger site, I believe that we just saw an SUP that should be coming to the planning commission for a reduced step back, because it just didn't make sense for that building.
So
Well,
that was, just to say that that is a unique example, because the way the zoning is built for downtown right now, it gave that lot two fronts and basically forced it into having two step backs that put it into a pyramid shape, which doesn't work.
And so,
Right.
in the
It would have been the
current
ziggurat at
zoning,
the end if it was.
separate from what the BAR does, in the current zoning, we have step back requirements on Main Street, Old Preston for some reason, and
Right.
Market Street, and then not on Water Street, right? So, that's kind of where that comes from and not the BAR. To me, Main Street probably makes sense. The BAR might have better ability to do that because of discretion, because sometimes it could look better without it. Market to me always seemed weird, and Old Preston makes no sense at all, because the Omni doesn't step.
And it's an arbitrary number. I mean, that's part of it. Is it's just kind of, it would be better to relate it to context and decide on a case-by-case basis how deep it should be, or if it should be.
Well, one of the concerns I've had about the downtown mall, and I have not tried to sort of visualize this, but I was sitting out on the mall and thinking, I don't want a whole lot of additional height on the south side of the downtown mall, because then the sun will never hit the downtown mall. And I don't know how you regulate that, and I don't know what the regulation needs to say, but I'm almost prepared to say, 5 stories on the north side of the mall is fine, but 3 stories on the south side of the mall would make more sense, because we're not gonna get any sun out of the north. I just don't wanna have a sense that the mall being surrounded by height on both sides becomes like the Grand Canyon, where the sun never hits.
We do have, I think Water Street seems to be a very good place for height, so that is a little bit of a conflict in my mind. And I don't know how to
Of
resolve
course,
that.
Water Street's also higher than Main, at least in some parts of it.
You mean lower than Maine, right?
Well, I'm thinking,
Or are you thinking down at the west end?
yeah, I'm thinking all the way at the west end, yeah, that's what I had it, because I was sitting at Mud House when I was having this thought, so.
Looking at the code building?
Basically, yes.
So what was the recommendation, now that I'm looking at the map and the orientation, what was the recommendation in regards to East High and sort of like using Park Street as the,
To shift the
West of-
CX5 to CX3.
to the west of Park Street?
Yes.
Yeah.
To the west, I'm sorry, I said east.
Yeah, and I mean, back to the kind of like, is the policy conflicting with the BAR? I just don't really understand why we would make such a disparity and then sort of put BAR in a position where they're constantly having to, kind of wasting people's time, right?
Right.
If a developer is thinking they could do something and then they're frustrated by the BAR process.
Part of the reason we want to make sure that the BAR guidelines are also very clear, so that we are broadcasting these, not only is this a process you can go through, but here's what you can expect in terms of the design of your building, so that people are going in with their eyes wide open to the extent that we can do.
may actually be a, I mean, it may as well, I mean, you could lower it down to CX3. To be honest, I don't think we would allow demolition of a single one of these buildings. There may be one or two in there, but I can't imagine any of them that we would allow demolition of.
Which building was you talking about?
Anything north of High Street.
I mean, the one right on Second Street Northeast, the L-shaped building is a pretty big surface parking lot in the back that could develop.
That is very true.
So.
Right
um,
adjacent to a single-family house.
I am interested in hearing more about the downtown mall itself. Because just, right now, the zoning is calling for allowing pretty substantial height only to be moderated by the BAR. And we've suggested, and we were looking at text changes, again, primarily at this point, our conversation has been around maintaining or some version of the step back requirement on Main Street. But I'm curious as to the general thoughts or concerns around height, let's say particularly relative to Main Street.
I think the point Lloyd made about that pretty neat cavernous effect on the wall is one we really ought to give some thought to. I mean, you may want to limit the height on that side so that we do get some sun in there. I was thinking about, again, West Haven and how that,
Yeah.
To the south, again.
I think it is useful to talk about, or to think about the downtown mall mostly in a historic resource way. You know, most of the downtown mall, I wouldn't like to see kind of demolished and built into a new building because we don't know how to build buildings like that anymore. But if, say, this building were torn down and built into a 100-story tower, I couldn't care less. You know, downtown is, I think, the best place to put a lot of, like, you know, disregarding how the buildings would look. This is where we want people to be able to be, right? It's where you can live without a car. It's where all the stuff is. I think there is kind of a tension between we want people downtown and also we don't want to demolish the historic buildings downtown because we can't make any new ones. And so to me, that makes sense to be in BAR's purview. Yeah.
I have conflicting ideas on this topic. One angel on my shoulder says, step back's terribly expensive, probably the most burdensome regulatory tool we can use. So the more judicious, the lighter touch, the better. The other angel says, well, if you're going to use it, downtown mall is probably the place to use it. And there, I would think something more context sensitive, not just a flat cap across the entire area, but a regulatory tool that sees what is happening around it, and possibly that treats corners differently from interior parcels.
And this is just throwing out a wild idea that I'm sure many people will have reactions, and I don't fully know how I feel about it myself. But in some of these areas where you've got these particularly difficult tensions, could it make any sense to have a more limited discretionary process that's something like an SUP process in the new zoning, just because you've got, like in this case, you've got, as others had mentioned, this really unique tension that is going to be extremely building and site specific in terms of, I mean, even Halpern's original vision was for it to be where people live, and most of it was going to be housing and not just retail, but this was primarily what got built. But it's also true, it's an enormous historic resource that you don't want to make a mistake where without discretion you get something that blocks sunlight or completely changes, you know, your view as a pedestrian in the area. So I don't know, just throwing it out.
I second that. I think it's very hard to put together a regulatory framework that can apply to every parcel in a consistent way. At some point, it's people staring at it and making practical, aesthetic, and economic judgments all at the same time, and it's not neat and clean. I don't think we can clean it up so far, and somebody's got to make those discretionary calls.
Now, you do have a BAR discretionary review in this space.
Yeah, well, and I don't know if we juice that somehow or what, but I think that if we try to write to this, we're gonna end up with something that's either A, incomprehensible and not applicable, or B, so complicated, everyone's gonna be afraid to do anything. And nobody understands it on the regulatory side of it, I mean, you're gonna be open up to discretion anyway. I think the complexity is gonna get out of control, I think. I'm not sure that, we have a simple solution to that either.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at, but I haven't given much thought to what that specific process would be exactly, or what it would look like. It's just, again, kind of a brainstorming idea.
And I've also been struck the last couple of months when we've had some BAR reviews coming up in council, that the couple of reviews have really been based around the idea of the ordinance seems to limit BAR's discretion or the factors there to consider, and therefore people are appealing to council so that we can basically give relief from what seem to be inappropriate regulations, or maybe not universally applicable regulations, put it that way. In a sense, we're almost like the BZA is supposed to be for the BAR, which isn't really what council ought to be doing, frankly. I don't think. And we find a way to make sure that the ordinance gives the BAR the authority to do the things that it needs to do, rather than to leave areas there where all they can say is, well, we can't do it, but you guys can.
Is it possible in this zoning you're right to do a really quick insert into the BAR guidelines? It just says on the downtown mall, you should, strive to not block the sunlight or something along those lines.
Yeah, it was one of the tensions I've been thinking about is the need to rewrite our BAR and ERB, guidelines, and then the time factor of that, and wondered if, is there kind of an amendment that could be kind of a quick hit of things that we know now? And that may be something that we come back and talk with the BAR about specifically, right?
I mean, to me, that seems like a really good idea. I don't know what everyone else is gonna say, but if there's a couple easy, quick fixes, I think we should do them sooner rather than, we've been waiting to do our guidelines for this comp plan to finish up. And then, once the comp plan was done, it was, well, now we gotta wait for the zoning rewrite. It's just been, it's been a little ridiculous.
Is it better to have a base zoning that BAR has to look at, and their discretion is to not allow that height, versus a base zoning where BAR can look at it, have the discretion to allow for extra height in certain cases, right? Like, essentially I'm asking, like, is it zoned too high, and therefore someone's always gonna be pushing that height limit?
Doesn't that sort of turn the BAR even more into Dr. No? So then you show up to want to develop on it, and they're like, well, yeah, base zoning says X, but we're not gonna let that for X, Y. I think there's more to be said for going for a lower height universally, and make somebody argue that they need their extra 2 floors. That's a lot easier.
That's-
One of the
and
things,
kinder and less
one of the
brutal.
things that we're wrestling with
To
though
everyone.
is that the BAR may not have the authority to expand the envelope. They clearly have the authority to reduce the envelope consistent with their guidelines, consistent with protecting a historic resource, but not necessarily the opposite direction.
Yeah. And the idea also would be to infuse whatever that process is with the notion that the BAR should not sort of be in the default no position. It really should be in the default maybe position for all of those.
I think we
What is it?
usually are. Maybe a really basic, simple question is, how do people feel about the idea of another 10-story building being somewhere downtown? If there are people who think, no, there should never be another 10-story building, then that makes that real easy. But if the idea is, yeah, no, we could see a 10-story building depending on where it's located, then this discussion should probably continue.
I think in my mind, it's very site context specific, including the building materials and design. So could I ever envision it? Yes, but I also think the default is a lot of skepticism and ability to have very strong review that includes a discretionary element.
And we're
Say
talking
downtown.
directly on the downtown
That's
mall,
my
right? Because that's the sort of,
Yeah,
like,
well,
the downtown district here is a lot more than the mall, and a lot of them, I think you can do a lot more than.
so, yes, on the downtown mall, and, you know, I'm thinking we've got the bank building, is it still Wells Fargo? What was it? Okay. So that actually is, you know, 10 stories on the mall. And then we've got the Dewberry, which is 10 or 11 stories, but pushed back quite a bit. But the parcel extends to the mall. So it's,
How tall is the code building, Carl?
101 feet, but only on the Water Street side.
yeah, I think it's 8 stories. They did some magic with the way the stories are
We
calculated.
had a height emergency.
There was some funny math involved in that one.
Because the good grade change in the way height was measured, but.
But I mean, if you're talking on the downtown mall directly, I mean, to your earlier point, the other factor is that it's very hard to see an existing building demolition even being approved, which is kind of like the very first element.
Right, we all kind of, we imagine since there aren't any vacant parcels on the mall,
Right.
that anything is gonna happen kind of behind the facade, like there'll be a preservation of, just looking at this building across the street, preservation of the front portion of that building, and then something rising behind it.
I mean, maybe not this one, right?
Well,
Yes.
so, yeah, actually, some
Like we did on
examples,
that corner there.
yeah, that's a brand-new building from the, I guess, 80s or 90s.
85.
So that probably, we could be argued to allow demolition of that. The same thing with, you know, obviously the parking garage.
First and Main might be another interesting example, in like '07, where the old Met is, there was a 9-story building proposed there.
Yes.
And that, I
there
think
was
you would
something
probably
there.
wanna preserve that facade, but, you know, I don't see a huge problem with that building necessarily being tall, and there's a large service parking lot behind it that
And I
can be
think,
incorporated.
I think the building was going on the surface parking lot, if I remember correctly.
I thought there was a mall facing component, but
I could be very
was
wrong.
in,
I just remember Woodard wanted to put a car elevator in there.
yes, that's why I remember it too. A car elevator?
Okay.
The
Park on the roof?
2000s housing boom. What a time.
Do we have anything more on this item? Public housing?
Sure, nothing else on the downtown mall?
Where's the Friendship Court?
I'm glad we resolved that so definitively.
I know, didn't we?
Gave us something to wrestle with, a lot of tape to review. So Friendship Court is a different kind of policy and consistency, but one where we can recognize the city now has made a significant investment in the idea of there being affordable housing in this location. And there wasn't an inconsistency at the time we were looking at it from the perspective of the land use map, but once we got zoning and really put some definition into what does the node zoning mean. So the node zoning calls for buildings that are commercial, ground floor commercial ready, right? 14-foot ground floor, higher transparency requirement. And those two requirements, which seem relatively simple on their face, are inconsistent basically with the design, the existing design for this project and the cost associated with those. The changes that they would need to make might lead to a reduction in number of units, could lead to a variety of challenges for that project if it were to have to go forward in its final 2 phases with that node zoning requirement. So ultimately, just having reviewed the project, we're suggesting that the appropriate zoning is the CX8. Yeah, as opposed to, so it's currently proposed at the node mixed use 10.
Is that for all the Friendship Court parcels, or?
For simplicity's sake, we were going with all, recognizing the 4th phase does have the notion of a ground floor commercial element, but that's not precluded by the proposed, the CX8 allows for that.
True, yeah.
CLN Heights, all of that can be done in CX8, it's just not mandated.
Mr. Mitchell, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I'm frankly grateful for the revision, and thank you guys for thinking through that. Makes great sense and protects our investment.
Mr. Duranzio.
Yep.
Ms. Russell.
No issue.
Mr. Schwartz.
I think that's fine. It does make me question if maybe the NX zones are too regimented in that sense, but I'll let that be. I'm fine with it.
Mr. Stolzenberg.
Yeah, it's fine.
Mr. Palmer. Do you have
That is
thoughts on
as brief an answer as we've ever gotten out of you.
Thought the same thing.
Way to draw it out.
I posted about this issue online, and I got some interesting feedback from an attorney that I want to share. His point was, well, if affordable housing is the only thing that's going to have problems with this, why not just exempt affordable housing from this requirement in all node zones and just solve the problem citywide?
How do you define that?
Yeah,
I understand,
I
but,
don't
but, yeah, I get a little concerned about what the, how we end up writing that up, how we define it, and,
Can you just go for a rezoning if it's that
right.
appealing?
It can be rezoned if it's an issue, and,
It's not
and.
Can you
I
do a
don't-
special exception kind of thing?
You could do a
Trying to get
special-
module 3 hints.
Yeah, but what I'm, I don't think it's necessarily universally issue. I think one of the things we're dealing with is that we have a project that's already partially designed as well. So that seemed to be the larger issue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Payne.
No problem with it, and we'll probably get into it with transitions, but just while we're on Friendship Court, I think one of the other tricky policy questions that I don't know the answer to is the Friendship Court Resident Steering Committee. I mean, one of their big concerns has always been with the immediate transition in terms of the scale and design of their neighborhood versus everything around it, and not wanting to feel like they're sitting in a bowl. And I just want to highlight that for the Resident Steering Committee, from the beginning, that has been a constant topic of conversation that they have brought up. But I'll admit, I don't know what the exact policy solution is.
Mr. Pinkston.
Yeah, I'm good with what's being proposed.
Ms. Breyer. Mr. Snook.
I'm fine with it.
I believe we have resolved the easy things. Let's switch to harder things. I think we are in zoning map errors now.
Okay. So in some respects, I contemplated that we would go item by item through this, as painful as that might be. And so I can start at the top. So for context, so these are the items where we're identifying a error in the sense of the mapping logic document, which governed basically how we applied the zoning districts on the zoning map, right? It was basically a set of rules that took us from the starting point of the land use map to a zoning map with a set of districts. And one of our primary tasks was just to review the zoning map to make sure that there weren't any errors made in transcribing that set of rules into a zoning map. And this was one of the sites that came up because the rules, strictly speaking, would have said that Wright's Scrapyard should have been NX3 rather than the NX5 that it was actually designated on the zoning map. That being said, we believe that NX5 is probably an appropriate district to apply here.
And just so that we are, maybe everyone understands, NX5, an example of that would be downtown Belmont, right?
That's another district that's in the
So
NX5, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So we're gonna chat about that in a minute.
Yeah, and so then I went ahead and identified this one also because this was the site that was also recommended for a land use map change into one of the higher intensity districts. Not remembering off the top of my head, I think it was NX8 it was proposed, suggested it ought to be zoned in NX8. When I look at the land use map, I see that those higher intensity urban districts were directed towards basically our large kind of job areas, downtown, 29 North, adjacent to the university, for that higher intensity kind of urban context, 8-10 stories. I think this one, in terms of the pattern presented by the land use map, is more appropriate towards that neighborhood center scale. The higher intensity level of the neighborhood center scale at 5, but that's it.
So, We talked about this a little bit over coffee earlier today, and I'd like maybe to get you guys input as well. This is like in a little valley, and there could probably be maybe some sort of industrial park in that little valley. So I'd like us to talk about maybe making this like, what do you call it, urban center. That's what downtown is like, an urban center.
Okay.
Giving some thought to whether this should be an urban center, so we could have a little more intense development there, maybe some industrial stuff or some light industrial stuff in that area. So what are folks, how do you guys feel about that?
I think that makes sense. I think one thing I'd add to what James said, in terms of like kind of proximity to downtown, and like being nearby it is like one of our very, very few, oh man, there we go. Like actually top-notch bike facilities, is along the new East Water Street, right? And so you've got this kind of direct path from the site to downtown, totally off-street, extremely safe feeling compared to everywhere else. And, you know, I would almost suggest that, like, rather than think about this as a flum change, we think about a change to the mapping logic, so that things like current or very near-term, very good bike ped facilities count effectively like a streets that work framework street. Which would put this at the intersection of the Mead Framework Street and this shared use path here. Future shared use paths will be like Emmett multimodal. I think that's really all we actually have in the pipeline, but Hillsdale might be another example. And so to me, that justifies the higher intensity under the current flum, which is not to say that I oppose a flum change since I proposed it, but we'll get to that conversation of whether we're gonna do those later.
Okay. That's fair. Yeah, just to be clear, so right now on the future land use map, this is a neighborhood mixed-use node. And what is being
Yeah, you're right.
contemplated is an urban mixed-use node, so that would be the flum change aspect of this.
But we're not there yet.
We're not there yet, so.
So, maybe
But we've had a teaser.
You expressed some sort of concern months ago about the possibility of industrial park stuff. What do you think about using that area for that sort of thing?
In the abstract, sure. Yeah, was it about 10 acres? Something like that.
It's around that, yeah.
Somewhere around there. I mean, there are a number of things about it that, with the grade differences, there's some interesting both challenges and opportunities. If that were an area where, I mean, it's certainly not a flat greenfield site, gray field. But certainly if people wanted to find a way to use that space productively, I mean, it's certainly the largest expanse of any developable size within an easy walk of a downtown mall.
What do people think about the height? If we do urban center, then we can go from 8 to 10 feet, 10 stories. If we do NX5, we're limited to 5 stories. So is that a worry for you?
I don't have any problem with height there, particularly considering the surrounding. You've got that grade going up to the railroad tracks. Who cares what the people in Amtrak see? And then across the street, I mean, you're still way below grade on Mead Carlton, whatever we're calling it at that point. So the geometry in my head doesn't present problems.
We're not just talking about the scrapyard, because it's all the parcels around it too, all the way up to East Market, backing up to what looked like single family along.
Well, it doesn't
Purchase Lane.
have to be. As I recall, what the consulting team said in response to my suggestion was that maybe you just do kind of these parcels against the railroad track, make those taller because they're down at the bottom of the hill.
You might want to say we would make it, 3 stories along, by Beer Run and so on, but potentially 10 stories down at the bottom of the hill.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really tough for
Yeah, and
specific.
yeah, I agree with that. Work with the topography but I think we do have to be very mindful of that frontage on East Market and the single-family homes around Burgess.
Yep, you do.
So the question is, are we generally comfortable with intensifying the use, or we do want to back up to NX5, which is less intense? So intensity to the degree of the downtown mall versus intensity to the degree of Belmont, downtown Belmont. Are we comfortable with more intensity, or?
When did downtown Belmont become more than anything that's 3 stories?
There's I think a 5-story industrial building from like the 50s there, and it kind of.
Okay, there's an IX5, I do see that at
Yeah.
Bainbridge and Monticello, but everything else is CX3 and
Yeah,
NX3.
I referenced it as Belmont being, if you look at the land use map, not the zoning, the
Oh, got
land
it.
use map identifies a set of neighborhood centers.
Okay.
And while this parcel that we're talking about now is well, effectively vacant for what we're talking about, I saw it as more akin to a neighborhood center than as an urban center.
Got it.
The argument that's being made is that it should be treated more like an urban center within the context of our land use map.
Mr. Schwartz?
No, I think it makes total sense to, definitely shouldn't be an X3, at least an X5 if it wants to be something else. I don't see a problem with height here. My own personal opinion is that we've got transitions in the code. I don't see an issue with height next to low height. It doesn't, to me, I've been in enough cities where that exists and it's perfectly fine and it works well. So I'm not sure I understand the fear of that, so. Yeah, maximize it, it makes sense. The access for bikes and everything, it makes a lot of sense.
Mr. Palmer?
Carl took my comment. It seems like a lot of that could be handled with the transition code. If done, that.
Thank you. For me, yeah, I definitely think 5 makes more sense than 3 with the transitions, especially to Market and Burgess. Mr. Pigston, you be quiet on this one.
5 is what it is now.
What?
5 is what it is now. What do you think about?
The future. We'll get there. Okay. Mr. Pigston?
I don't really have anything to add on top of, what you all have been saying makes sense to me.
Thank you. Ms. Puryear?
I'm with the group. It makes sense.
Mr. Snow?
I got nothing else.
I believe we understand this issue.
You didn't ask my opinion.
Did I not? I'm sorry, Ms. Russell.
I think that's high for that area. I don't think 10 stories, except on maybe in that hole would be appropriate. So I'm not comfortable just sort of broad brush stroking it.
I think we were.
3 or 5 right now.
Five.
I think we were suggesting transitions as we move
Right.
away from the whole. So
Correct.
the whole could be, 10, but as we transition, we get down to
Absolutely.
5 and then 3. I think
Yes.
somebody said that.
That's what you said. You did say that, and we are agreeing with what you said.
Yeah, and I just don't understand how the Module 2 accomplishes that, because I just don't, we're
Well,
trusting that it does,
in the
and
ca- in-
I have not comprehended how that works.
I think in the context that they're describing, we would actually use differentiated zoning districts
Oh,
to accomplish what is being described. So we put a 8-story zoning district close to the railroad tracks, a 5 and a 3, or whatever the combination is, right?
Okay.
But a set of zoning districts to accomplish what's being described here.
okay, yeah, I could get behind that. I then misunderstood them.
For the record, I was not saying go down to 3, but I think that's just me.
What-
But yeah.
Next
I
up,
would
I
just be
see-
really sensitive to the surrounding residential.
Yes, and that's what we're
However that's
concerned about.
accomplished.
Eric's rude.
Residents first.
I will say even the, required transition, if it were to be NX8, that type C transition seems like a pretty substantial step back to me that seems probably about I don't know.
Yep.
I mean, I haven't measured both distances, but it's, you know, a 60-foot step back after 3 stories, and then another 40-foot step back after 7 stories, which seems like a pretty substantial step back in the tight.
20 feet from Carlton Mead or whatever it is, you've got a cliff going down immediately. So.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't think you really
You
need
start building at the
much.
bottom and then you start doing setbacks,
There.
step backs from there.
I'm thinking more where it faces the single-family homes and duplex on Burgess is the issue, right?
Yeah.
Barrett's Road.
Right, so Barracks Road is an example of misdesignation on the zoning map. The property shows up on the land use map as an urban mixed-use node. If we follow the rules here in the in the logic rules, it should have been actually zoned NX8, which was the notion that was presented.
And so why not make it NX 10, which is consistent with the future land use map, right? And was Carl's suggestion?
The rules say that NX 10 is reserved for downtown streets, so streets identified in the streets that work as a downtown street. So we've basically said 10-story is a downtown feature. All other urban districts identified in the city are 8.
And I guess the other suggested change I'd make to the mapping logic there is fronting a downtown street or just a giant road like 29 and maybe 5th south of Harris. Because to Carl's point in his suggestions, you know, why are we restricting that to discourage development of these strip malls that we say are less than ideal urban forms?
So if, just to summarize, it is currently designated 5-story, and the guidelines say it should be 8-story, am I correct?
Yes, sorry, thank you, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell, thoughts on this item? Mr. Duranzia?
Yep.
Ms. Russell?
That logic sounds good.
Mr. Schwartz?
Yes, I mean, I still think 10 would be better, but 8 is good.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
Yeah, I mean, I think 10 and 10 is consistent with the FLUM.
Mr. Palmer?
8 works. You know, that one parcel that's like Federal Executive Institute, is that even in play for anything, or should that be like civic? I don't know how you handle federal property. We don't have much in the city. It just looks like a huge area, and you know, maybe they want to build.
I was about to ask that, yeah, I don't know.
It may be contracted to the feds.
Yeah, I don't know that, I don't know the ownership on that.
I mean, if it is owned federally, it's exempt from our zoning, and off we go.
General Services Administration owns it.
Owner, United States of
Yep.
America.
Yeah, General
Just
Services
to
Administration owns it.
Make clarity, maybe that should go to civic, just to kind of clarify that it's different.
I remember when it was a Thomas Jefferson Motel.
Really? But I was,
It was before our time, Mr. Mitchell. Let's just
That
keep
was
it moving.
low.
Just keep it moving.
They're not paying us taxes.
said with love,
I'm not
said
the
with
oldest
love.
one.
As for me, I think I agree that 8 makes more sense. I see support for 10.
So, I mean, to the point that Rory raised, are you guys suggesting that, I mean, again, the mapping logic suggested that 10 stories is really reserved for downtown Charlottesville. Are you guys suggesting that we shouldn't reserve 10 stories for downtown Charlottesville? And in other areas should go higher? Is that,
Well, I'd say downtown at 29 and maybe 5th south of Paris.
Yeah.
all right, I'm
But
sorry, I heard
not
that at 29,
other
that was a
places.
rather random height to pick, but now I hear what you're saying, 29 north, got it.
Yeah.
I don't have a ton of appetite for making changes to our mapping logic at this point in the process. I feel like what we need to do is focus on what's in front of us and not constantly be pushing, particularly height and density. I think that's gonna undermine public confidence in regards to some of the concerns that the public has around height and drastic change. And we just seem to constantly be pushing and pushing and pushing. And, you know, I wanna make make sure we're coming up with a plan that council can pass at the end of the summer or whatever it is.
I'm afraid of missed opportunities in areas where nobody's going to complain.
I think 29 in particular, and kind of also the Strap Yard to a lesser extent, are areas of rare public consensus that I heard. And actually, a lot of this list of those changes I made in November came from Citizens for Responsible Planning put out a list of kind of vacant parcels that they said we should more heavily utilize. And I think almost everyone agrees that, 29, Seminole Square, the old Kmart, even Barracks should be more, right? Or we should
Not be-
ideally have more housing there to take the pressure off of everywhere else. And to me, that area in particular, it seems to me very consistent with our whole 2021 process. To essentially, I would
What
even.
residents in those neighborhoods are we not hearing from,
What neighborhoods?
like behind, thinking like, well, I'm thinking behind Whole Foods, so that's not applicable, but.
Well, you do have some apartments, I believe, behind Barracks.
Over in Melmont.
Yeah.
Like
many.
the student housing?
Student housing, yeah.
Primarily, yeah.
Arlington,
Mr. Payne?
Yeah, I see the logic for NX8. Maybe I don't know what if anything to do about it. Just a thought that comes to mind is UVA has now transformed the Ivy Emmett corridor, and does that expand over time down into Barracks? Maybe not. Maybe that will happen irrelevant of whatever zoning changes we make, but it's just a thought that came to mind.
Mr. Pinkston?
So the notion is to go up to NX8, and then it's being suggested to actually go to 10.
Right, so the basic land use map and the set of rules that we use to translate that into zoning would suggest that NX8 is the zoning district that Barracks should be applied to
I
Barracks
see
Road.
that, yeah.
Right, so that is kind of the starting point, but then the additional question is, we said, in this body of rules, we kind of posed the idea that 10-story buildings are really reserved for the areas close to downtown, and that all other outlying areas are maxing out at 8. And the conversation here at the table is, should we be considering 10 stories in areas like on Route 29? And that's the follow-up question. It's not a change to the land use map, because the land use map did contemplate 8 or 10 stories. It's a question of whether we want to be considering 10 stories.
The land use map did contemplate
Yes.
having,
Yeah. So it's not, this would not be inconsistent with the land use map. It's simply a question of, and really this document was put together by our team, right? So it's not an adopted document.
to Ms. Russell's point, though, I guess would be some concern in the community that we're continuing to push the envelope. Is that the concern about trying to take it to 10?
I don't know that I'm the one to answer that one, but
Well, I think, I don't want to speak for Commissioner Russell, but I think it's that combined with the fact that if you went to 10, you're not even consistent with the land use map.
no,
So
But
you-
the
No, it would be
10
consistent
is
with land use
consistent
map.
with the land use map. It's-
NX10 would?
Yes, it's
Okay,
just,
well, never
it's
mind.
just inconsistency with this body of rules that we said, these are the rules we followed to take that land use map and turn it into zoning map. And one of the things we said is 10-story is reserved for areas adjacent to downtown.
This
If
is the
it's
first time we've
consistent
seen-
with the,
And we put this out with module 1,
But it is inconsistent with public guidelines
with what we
that
put
you've
out.
produced.
Yeah, yes.
if it's consistent with the future land use map, I'm okay with 10.
Is it consistent?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
8 to 10 is
Yeah,
But the
yeah,
land use map said 8 to 10, but your document says 8.
yes.
So how many more people do you get from 8 to 10? Since you're talking about density, what does that mean?
It's possible you'd make a project more viable.
Yes.
What does that mean?
This had me a little confused, but the just getting the extra height makes the change in building type from something that's combustible to non-combustible more feasible. So you can,
From wood frame to steel frame.
Doesn't that confer a change at 5 stories, though?
It's
but once you
5
get
plus
to
a
8,
2-story
like it's the
podium.
more, the higher you can get, once you're past that point, the more economical it is.
And you're really probably never gonna get 8, right? Because 7 you could do in 5 stories could be wood, and then 8 everything has to be concrete and steel. So like it's a huge increase in cost for all of your units for just a few more units. And to really make that
Do it
worthwhile,
for
you
10.
gotta have more stories
Yeah.
to average it over. I think is the point.
So it catches on fire, how are you gonna put the fire out?
Well, at 10
I
stories in
mean,
a concrete
I mean,
building.
you know, what do you have? I hear the density, I hear easier to build, but you also have to think about infrastructure too. I mean, do you have fire trucks that will go 12 and 15 feet? I don't know, but do we?
So 15 stories?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that a yes, we do, or yes?
No, I don't know how high the ladder trucks will go.
See, yeah.
I mean, I think any of that would have to be
Well, I assume
during
it's
site plan
gonna be
review
Under 100 feet.
anyway,
Are we
right?
still talking about 100?
I don't know, is 10 stories 100 feet? I don't know.
It's more than that.
It'll be more than that.
Okay,
But I mean, I think when you have, I mean, a lot of cities, you don't expect the fire truck to, the ladder won't make it all the way up. It's, you have
Nope.
sprinklers, you have a type of building type that is much harder to burn.
I see.
So, I mean, we've had some bad examples in history of, like, what was the high-rise tower in
Grenfell.
the UK that the exterior insulation caught on fire, but that's against building codes.
But one of the points you're making is, you get to a certain height, it's no longer sticks, it's.
Oh, yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like
Safer.
So
right
they're-
now, so.
The fire code is trying to resolve all those potential problems.
And also, we're saying we're gonna allow it somewhere else, right? And so the question is just whether to also do it on 29?
That we would allow it downtown anyway. So the question is 29.
It's not as walkable as we profess we want downtown to be.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
On the flip side, you know, we have the Hillsdale shared use path, we have the whole hydraulic reconstruction is happening, and the county is putting a few hundred units where Seville Oriental is right now, right over the county border, or the city-county line.
Yeah, that's the project. The interesting is when their planning commission took it up, they looked at our land use map and said, they're gonna allow 10 stories here, you should up it to 10.
They did. So we better make that area walkable if all those people are going there anyway.
You know, I hear all your points about, those points along 29. I think I'm more frustrated with what I, sense that we're not getting to, a place where we're finding, where we're gonna get into resolution. Kind of based off of Mayor Snook's comments a few months ago around all the concerns he's hearing from the public, and I'm worried about this going to public hearing and it being a very difficult plan to pass.
Ms. Perrier, do you have any additional thoughts on this one?
No, I'm appreciating her concerns. And what does this mean when you get to the final stage and you need consensus or passing from this body to move forward? And I appreciate the commissioner's concern. I completely appreciate it.
So, can you walk us through what your preference for the height would be, and what's your preference for that?
I'm not so much objecting to the height as more just the process, I think, is like, why at this
Why at the
juncture do
final
we,
hour?
change our mapping logic? I mean, I'm a little of two minds, because I'm understanding the arguments now, but my reaction is always kind of like, why are we always pushing for more? We're already changing a lot in this plan, right? It's gonna change, and we're gonna be out ahead of lots of other cities, and that's great in a lot of ways. We're doing a lot of really good things. I support a lot of the things that we're doing in in allowing for more density. But we're kind of giving it all away, and we're not really having a lot
You have to go to
of.
11. You're not gonna be turning it up to 11.
Metaphorically, yes,
Yeah.
yeah, 11, right, on the dial, not 11 stories, thank you.
But Ms. Russell, didn't we address some of that with the ARB A, B, and C a few weeks ago? Walking it back from, was it 12 at one point?
16.
Yeah, and 16 in the future land use map,
So we-
or 12 in the future land use map,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, but he's referring to a couple weeks ago when we were
Mhm.
talking about the double density provision. and-
But we walked that back,
Yes,
right?
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I respect your point and agree with it, because I think we need to be careful, but for me, the piece about this specific one is if it was agreed in the future land use map that you could go up to 11, I'm not quite sure how these mapping logic rules worked.
Right.
But that was like, y'all did a lot of work to pull that across the line, so I feel more comfortable with that.
Mhm.
If that weren't the case, I would say no, but, and given those locations, I would think more height would be fine there, but.
Yeah, I'm having difficulty finding somebody who's gonna say, oh, I'm completely happy with 8 stories on Belmont, but by God, don't go to 9. You know, I mean, considering it's there.
Yeah, yeah,
Just,
I'm
I mean,
not,
In the specifics, I understand your, I agree with your general view, though. There are these individual cases. I don't think anyone's gonna care.
Mayor Snook.
Generally, I mean, I have not heard anybody who has expressed horror about the notion that Barracks Road Shopping Center might be too developed. And most of the comments that I've gotten from people are basically along the lines of, go ahead and put as many people as you want on Seminole Square, on Barracks Road, just don't put them in my neighborhood. And to a certain extent, this is one of, so if you're concerned about where the public comment is gonna come, it's gonna come in that direction, not the other way. My concern is a little bit different, and that is that, and I'm looking at the designation of NX5 that includes not only North Barracks Road Shopping Center, but also Cedar Court, for example. And Cedar Court is still in its apartments and so on. And, but I'm not sure that I would say that that's an area that we ought to be saying, let's make that NX8 or NX10 or whatever. I'm a little less concerned about the main body of the Barracks Road Shopping Center, although it's an expensive enough property at this point that I have a hard time figuring out how it's likely to get redeveloped anytime soon. So we may be sort of arguing about how many acres go on the head of this pin. NX8 is fine with me. I suspect NX10 would be just fine with me also. I don't feel real strongly either way. I also, however, understand Commissioner Russell's point about even just the appearances of sort of changing the rules at the end of the game. So I'm profoundly a maybe.
Powerful.
That's helpful.
Next up, I see Allied Street.
Yes. So this is an interesting one. Again, the land use map identified this area as the neighborhood mixed-use node. We suggested a zoning district of NX3. The mapping logic said where you have 4-story buildings, you should consider NX5. But this is one of those places where they're interspersed, right? And we have, I don't know how many 4-story buildings are interspersed in that space. We're not going to go down that street parcel by parcel, NX3, NX5. So, again, we went with NX3. I'm kind of looking to you guys, if you believe that we should instead have leaned in the other direction, that's the question.
what's the 4-story one there?
The apartment building at the end, and we just approved a 7-story
Right, that's
building.
what I was thinking.
1,
about,
2.
is the main apartment building.
Yeah, the 4 stories at the back on the right, I think the 7 stories on the left.
Oh, at the cul-de-sac?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, against the train tracks.
There's quite an elevation change between there and Birdwood.
Yes.
How's that gonna look for them?
This is the bottom.
I mean, I know it is, I'm just wondering,
How's it
how
gonna
much does
look?
that elevation change?
Looks like about 15 feet
No.
from the houses to where these parcels start.
I thought it was-
Feels like more.
Yeah.
I was gonna guesstimate 30, but.
Oh, it's more like 25, 30 on the eastern half
There's that staircase that goes up.
by Hillcrest. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes we can even see.
Starting with Mr. Mitchell.
Nothing of value to add.
Mr. Duranzia.
Utterly agnostic on this issue.
Ms. Russell.
Can you, help me understand, you don't want to have two zoning districts
Just so,
intersperse?
yeah, so if you have, so at this point, there's two parcels that are 4 and 7 stories, right? But we wouldn't want to necessarily just zone those to NX5 and the rest of it at NX3. We would want to have one consistent zoning district for this area. Since the preponderance of the area is lower in height, we suggested NX3. But it was raised as a possibility to consider for NX5. The rule here, the rule in our mapping logic was where you have 4-story buildings, you go NX5, otherwise the base zoning is NX3. You'll note, like in each one of these cases, we basically, our starting point was always the lowest density district, and then there were reasons to go to the higher intensity.
Yeah, I think this is an example where with your step backs worked appropriately, it could support the extra height.
Well, there aren't, in the
Oh,
transitions,
5,
in the
yeah.
transitions. And then the other thing, just on, I'll say it at other points, but I'll say it here as well, that property owners always are gonna have the opportunity to come forward and seek rezoning, like.
Sure.
Mr. Schwartz.
I'd like to see an X5 there.
Mr. Stolzenberg.
5.
Mr. Palmer, thoughts on this one?
I think 5's fine. And since you asked, 29 North, I mean, I agree with the logic for that to go higher. I suspect there's places there where 8 stories is probably more appropriate than 10. So maybe there's a little nuance, especially that area back in Angusburg, close to the meadows.
I think 5 makes sense with transitions to Birdwood. Mr. Payne.
I lean to NX3. I mean, this is one of those things we've talked about a little bit, but I think these mixed-use corridors where you have commercial use with some apartment, the scale of the experience, I think, in terms of what people are looking for matters a lot. And I think in terms of what people are looking for in an area like this, I'm imagining it kind of like downtown Belmont of a smaller scale, which makes me lean NX3.
Mr. Pinkston.
I'm good with 5.
Ms. Berger.
I think I could live with 5.
Mayor Snook.
I think I'm fine with 5, except for 2 parcels at the top that sort of stick out into the Birdwood Court neighborhood. And I haven't walked those parcels, so I don't know what's the logic for that? What's the lay of the land there?
I think that's the retaining wall, the way the topography looks.
The one with the parking lot does seem to slope all the way up.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you got it on Miles.
Good.
As I spill everything.
Let's get lost on this one. There we go.
But I think those would all be pretty squarely in the transition step back area.
Yeah, I think this is
Yeah,
the.
parking lot.
The way they,
No,
the way they jut up into that area, the transition would kind of hem the building in.
Yeah.
And that's a
Here's parking lot.
2-story parking lot there.
Okay, all right.
So that parking lot is already, it's part of the Allied Street thing, it's not part of Birdwood and
That's
it's
what I was
not-
thinking, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
So we said 5, right?
yeah.
Most people say
Looks
5.
like it.
Okay, all right.
But if that's at a level
If that's essentially at the level of Birdwood, I don't want that to be a 5 for that parcel.
Right.
So I think that's where transitions would kind of come in, right?
It
Is
may
you-
well be, and I'll have to rely on those of you who have mastered the transition rules better than have I.
Okay, all
So
right.
that would be
That will be.
type B. Actually, there wouldn't be a transition if it were 3, but under 5,
There would
there's a
be.
type B transition, which is,
Is it gonna hem it in sort of a unusable shape anyway?
It might, which would just force it down to 3 stories.
Right.
or just no step back and straight up. all the way
Farther back, right.
Yeah.
That is, as Chairman mentioned, the step backs are kind of expensive. Oftentimes, the result, when you have a mandated step back, is they just bring the whole building farther away.
So what would that mean?
I think
So-
it means it could be 5, but it wouldn't really make a difference.
Sounds like it's, the process is working.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the building has to be 20 feet from the lot line, then after
Mhm.
3 stories, it has to step back another
And if you
30
think
feet.
about that in
So you
the-
likely would end up being 50 feet back.
50 feet,
Okay.
which-
Or either 3 stories or 50 feet back.
Right.
Five-story building.
So it would have to go back to 3 anyway. Okay.
That's kind of what they're saying.
Which one are we on?
Okay.
Turning to.
Allied Street.
Still?
Are we good on this one? Yes, no, exactly. Let's turn to Preston Avenue.
Yeah. Okay, so the question that was raised here, this is at Preston, are we bringing this up on the screen? Thank you, guys. So, again, in these corridors, we have CX5 is kind of the base zoning, and then at key intersections, it goes up to 8. But really, the question that was being raised here was whether maybe at this westernmost intersection, not going up to 8 and only going up to 5.
So like Grady and
Yeah.
10th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not getting it.
Is that the Rock House? Or the,
Yes,
Yeah,
one
that's
of
in
them
there,
is.
yep.
It is, the Rock House was not 8 though, is it?
I think it is the little corner that's, no, I don't know.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I don't
think
know.
that's-
Isn't
I
that
think
the
8 is
corner?
5, or sorry, I think Rock House is 5, it's the next.
Yeah,
parcel
that's
over.
right. It's the
It's
legal
not-
legal aid justice
Yeah.
center.
oh, okay.
Yeah. Right there.
I was on the wrong page.
Like- And the Rock and Roll House is 5 also.
I think it's 5 stories in the back.
Yeah.
I think.
So all of that could be CX5. Yeah.
And you'd like to see that be CX5?
That was the suggestion, yeah.
Would you say the Black House was 5?
There's a
Yes.
notion to
And
think
we
it's
still-
down to 5.
Yeah.
I support that.
So it's interesting, right, because pretty much all of this is already developed except for, or like redeveloped into Dairy Market. Like this is Dairy Market and this is Fenton Dairy, the new apartments, which are not gonna be torn down.
We got
These
Martin Hardware.
Are city, I thought those were right of way.
That's city
And then,
right of way.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
Martin Hardware, right?
Yeah.
And it's really this big parking lot where I think you would want to put anything, right? As long as you can make the transition across West Street good with your new cross-street transition rules. I mean, that seems like where you'd wanna put density and not on Martin's Hardware or on the things that were just built. But for these specific parcels, I think that's fine to reduce.
Well, I can't-
Reduce and let someone bring that, you know,
Yeah.
proposal to the table.
Yeah, I guess.
Right.
Mr. Mitchell? Mr. Durancio?
Cinco.
Ms. Russell?
I agree 5, and are those mapping like anomalies, the little wedges, what is that?
Those are the right of way. They're just, it's right of way that got picked up.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Schwartz?
My neighbors are gonna kill me.
Mm.
I really think Preston is a missed opportunity if we don't try to take advantage of more density along it. I'm fine, I mean, I see the logic in 5, I'm not gonna fight you guys on it, but I do think, personally, I'd rather see a little more 8 around there and just deal with transitions. Because again, it's a street that, it's gonna be a missed opportunity if we don't develop it. Too much easy access to downtown and elsewhere.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
Are we doing a smaller plan Is this what you said was gonna be the first one?
I hope so.
Then I think it's fine to kick it to that and drop it to 5 anyway, because these parcels don't really matter, right? Like, the ones next to them are the ones that are gonna get developed and not these. I do also think though, one maybe relevant point is that when we eventually redo that intersection, there's gonna be like an acre of land created out of thin air that is gonna be city-owned that probably should be intensely developed into as much housing as we can fit on it. But that's a problem for down the road.
Mr. Palmer, what's on this one?
I agree with Lori, that big site there. So, but it's certain kind of architecture there that I hate to see lost. Maybe there's a way of accommodating fifth season building.
I sympathize with Mr. Stolzenberg and Mr. Fries's points. This is an important intersection, and I want to see intensity and thought in this area, because I want the intersection fixed, among other things. But a lot of the development opportunities are actually east of this area, which is confusing. So I'm okay with 5 for now, but I think this is an important issue that should be taken up in the small area plan. Mr. Payne?
Yeah, I would support it going down. And again, I have a bigger question around these mixed-use corridors, again, really around if you're giving away all the height and intensity, if we're looking to do small area plans in these areas and kind of structure the growth there, do you de facto lose all your leverage to actually guide it? But that's bigger than this.
Mr. Pigston?
Fine with 5.
And Ms. Braden? Mayor Smith?
I'm thinking 5 in part because if this is going to be sort of the introduction to a corridor, it shouldn't be real tall at the top.
Yeah.
It's the top of the hill, it's the introduction, it's a residential neighborhood right next to it.
Please save your neighbors, Mr. Schwartz.
I'm gonna get kicked out of the neighborhood
But we
at some
saved
point.
you. Just tell them you were outvoted.
West Main Street, our
West Main
favorite.
Street. So this one gets talked about in 2 places here. I'll just make the comment here, and then we can move to the section where I talk about this in greater depth. But the comment here is simply that when we were producing the draft map, it was intended for CX8 to be, now I'm really nervous of getting my directions wrong. Thank you. That doesn't help.
You want
It was
CX8 on
intended to
the
be
west.
CX8 to the west of the bridge, and CX5 to the east of the bridge was consistent with prior zoning decisions. There was a miscommunication. There was an error on the map. It was miscommunicated how to fix it, and it ended up being shown as in the entirety at CX8. So our initial proposal is that our proposal is that on the east side, it should come back to CX5. Now, if you want to move to the next section, we could hit the bottom of the next section. There is
Zoning
an
map changes.
argument to be made that the train station site itself could, because it sits so low, could accommodate a CX8 designation similar to the other side of the bridge. So I'll leave that to y'all.
Mr. Mitchell, can you start us?
Train 8, west, 8, east 5.
These are,
And I
good, I got it, yeah.
That makes sense to me.
And I'll just, no, these are all zoning changes that do not require a change to the future land use map.
Right. So again, train 8, west 8, east 5.
Mr. Duranzio?
Agreed with Commissioner Mitchell.
Ms. Russell?
I agree with Commissioner Mitchell.
Mr. Schwartz?
I'd say keep it all 8 and let the BAR do its thing.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
Fine with either of those.
You're
Bowman.
very consistent.
Sometimes.
Which one? We have two big ideas. Mr. Mitchell?
Commissioner Mitchell. Got it right.
I share Mr. Schwartz's esteem of the BAR. I think 8 is fine, and we can let the BAR do their job. Mr. Payne?
I would remove the CX8 designation.
Any feelings on the train station?
Not particularly. Again, I'm going to come back to the same thought I have about these mixed-use corridors. I haven't thought about that specific parcel too much, so I'm open to it, but I have not thought about his recommendation specifically.
Mr. Pinkston?
I second what Mr. Mitchell proposed.
Ms. Brady?
I can agree with Mr. Mitchell, but somebody's gotta do something with that train station, it's a business. I mean, something's just gotta happen.
We've been saying that for 40 years, pretty much.
We paved it
I
fine.
remember discussing it. in the
15 years ago.
When we were talking about paving it, we were concerned that would mean that it would stay paved for years. Oops. Mayor Snow?
I agree with Commissioner Mitchell.
I believe we have clarity on this.
All right.
Turning to,
Let's go to item number 7.
how would you describe this?
Oof, now I'm regretting saying, let's go to item number 7. So, Patrick, you're gonna bring us to East High and Mead. All right, so this is actually the same issue that we were just touching on with Preston as well. We've got a intersection that was identified as a key intersection and therefore popped up to the 8-story height. But we received a comment that suggested that this should be 5 stories like the remainder of the corridor. And staff doesn't really have a perspective one way or the other.
So where are the paths? Maybe
It's like where Jack and Jill's,
Yeah,
Mhm.
up here. So
Oh.
8 is the darker
Tubby's.
up there. So it's really just a question of 8 or 5 in this
we want to
intersection.
drop it down to 5.
Right.
Staff doesn't have a perspective. It was one of the comments that was received is that should be dropped down to,
Why?
5.
Why do they want it down to 5?
Argument was concern about, displacement and adjacency.
Displacement.
Yeah, just displacement of the smaller homes in that area and the adjacent scale of development.
Those homes are toast.
So, I don't see that 5 or 8 changes that, but, like, either way.
He wants to be tarred and feathered and
So-
run out of town.
No, but they are, sorry. I'm going to shut up until it's my turn. Shut up.
I think another point I've heard from Mr. Payne is that that whole intersection is weird and terrible.
Yes.
Is there any thought about like how reconfiguring it would work and whether that would be easier if it didn't develop or if it did develop?
Rory, would you point out what's the cost of like down there?
Yeah, so it's,
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
grab me that
this
picture.
You know, like
Mead,
Tubby's
East High intersection.
Jack and Jill's.
And Charlottesville
Or Mead
Drive.
comes
The intersection where you
Yeah.
can stop
I know they
and
have
let
it, just
people
the-
come in
the
front.
houses
And-
these
and-
guys-
Rory, I hate to speculate on the question, but
In that place.
you're, that assumption, I
Some
think,
really
would
little tiny houses.
assume a pretty significant land assembly needing to
Just a
happen.
little bit.
To reconfigure
Right
it?
there.
To generate a project enough scale to then pay for the,
Yeah.
Yeah.
to pay for that kind of a
I mean, I think you'd
intersection
need,
reconfiguration is a pretty big deal.
oh, for them to reconfigure it for us. I think there's more, could we have them reserve the right of way in the future via the site plan review
Even just
process?
to go to what it is.
This is horrible.
To, I mean, I guess it would really be this,
I mean, I don't even know.
the old camera store, right? Is it still a camera store?
It'd have to be a developer coming in and buying multiple farms.
Weird. Is the giant camera mural still there?
Some of those are residential.
Again, you're making a presumption around land assembly.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the order. Mr. Mitchell, what are your thoughts on this one?
This is hard.
Yes.
I like the idea that those little houses are there, although I question whether it's the highest use of that area, but I do have some empathy for the folks that
Small business
might have
owners.
those houses disappear.
Mhm.
I don't know, I'm gonna defer to, I'd like to hear other opinions.
Mr. Ronzio?
I like turtles. So I'm kind of Commissioner Mitchell's mind that I'm not, I mean, bluntly, that intersection is so damned awful that it's sort of like, I had this really old Mercedes Benz once, and I never,
No.
ever flushed the radiator because it was composed entirely of rust. And it worked perfectly, but it should have been broken. And with this, I'm sort of the opinion that I'm scared to touch it just because it seems to be so precarious. If that makes any sense. That any change we make there, I think the chances that things are just gonna be bloody awful no matter how we address it because of that intersection. Having said that, I guess if you held a gun to my head, I'd say CX-5 for that.
Ms. Russell? No good.
So you would leave it as it is?
No, no, CX, he's proposing to change it to the CX5.
So you were going 6-10.
No, no, it's eight. It's at 8, the mapping logic took us to 8. The comment we received was that it should be 5,
Okay.
based on
And
factors.
that would preserve the homes from there, likely.
Well, not even. I mean, it's still upzoned and
Yeah.
those are
It's
still
upsound.
probably.
I'm also sort of confused to see what an 8-story could get through the net there too, considering everything that's there.
Right.
And I mean, this may be another needle with the angels dancing on it,
I think that's probably a fair point.
you know? So, I think Mayor Snook's opinion on the Barracks Road applies here too. But still 5, if you had to hold it under my head.
And so, how does that change the character of that intersection? That allows them to build up to what and what? By going to 6-5.
Right.
5 stories.
5 stories.
I mean, 7 with bonus, but I mean,
I can't see what gets built there.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
yeah, I don't see you building that tall without doing significant lane assembly, and if you did that, then we could realign the intersection,
I mean,
right?
is our node logic around key intersections too? Because that's not a
Yeah,
key
that's-
intersection, right? It's not.
Well, I mean,
um,
Mead is a relatively major
But it's not-
street, it's Framework Street,
It's not
but
key in that it's functioning like a key intersection.
that's a fair
You know what I
point,
mean?
yeah.
I think it's problematic and that would exacerbate the problem. Also just be infeasible. I don't think it makes sense to have it be the 8 node there.
Mr. Schwartz?
I mean, the more houses though, the more dense we make that, the worse the intersection's gonna be. I drive through there almost every day.
Yes.
It's a nightmare. We make it denser, it's just gonna be that much more difficult. No,
And also more funding to fix it.
yeah.
Yeah, well, on the other hand, in site plan review, they might say, hey, this is gonna make this intersection fail, you need to put in all this money to improve it. And so the only thing that might incentivize enough land assembly to actually fix it without a bunch of city money would be,
Yeah, but how much worse could the traffic study be than the present circumstances on the ground?
It's pretty bad right now. Right?
I mean, I
Well,
don't know
I
if that
assume that
instrument
at
really
some point,
works.
they're just gonna say, we're gonna make it, Mead turn and come in at a 90-degree angle to East High Street.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Take out the camera store and just get that intersection regularized so that people can see where they're going.
you'd think,
That's likely the direction it goes in,
yeah.
Take out the cameras.
I mean, really, you could just do it, Stuart, but I'm not gonna traffic engineer here.
I'm ambivalent. I actually don't think 8 or 5 would make a difference with the traffic or whether the houses are preserved or any of that. I mean, if someone can make an 8-story building work there, go for it, but I'm ambivalent.
It's gonna be right next to the RA line.
I guess depending on what side. Yeah, you're right, there's some that, yeah.
Either side.
We have transitions though.
And we got a hill.
But the transitions are gonna make it so you can't build
I,
next to it.
right, so yeah, that's why I don't think it matters.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
I agree, it doesn't matter.
Mr. Bover, does it matter?
It matters a little bit. A little bit more of a corridor, that's not a knock on
Stewart is the little cross street.
Yeah.
Diagonal.
That little guy.
I mean, that makes sense to me.
I mean, I would agree, that's the place that makes sense. You just gotta,
Just cut off Mead and make it a dead end there, and if people wanna make a left, they gotta make a left on Stewart.
yep,
I
we solved the
actually-
problem, guys.
I agree, I think Stewart makes more sense, and that should be basically closed off at one end. Not a zoning solution, but that would create a zoning solution. Mr. Payne?
CX5, as I've said, more than anything, the infrastructure there, it just stuck out to me as something that doesn't seem to make much sense. And this isn't, the displacement question is not unique to here, is not the number one factor as I saw it. It's more, again, just don't see the infrastructure making sense there. I'll come back to it again. I don't know the answer, but on these mixed-use corridors, the question of land assembly and acquisition and the type of investment you bring in displacing businesses that are accessible and in some cases owned by more working-class families in the city, I think is a very important question. And I know it was blithely dismissed, but these are things that people care deeply about, and working-class people who feel shut out from the city, when we talk like that, feel it even more, so.
And we've got another one that's even a more on point example on Cedar Hill and Hydraulic. Which speaks exactly to that point.
Mr. Pinkston?
5.
Oh,
Ms. Brady? Mayor Snyder? I don't know that I was clear. I think 5, and I think Stewart makes more sense, but if that is more clear.
Sorry, you repeat that.
I think 5, and I think Stewart makes more sense.
Stewart.
So putting 8 at Stewart?
Right.
Yeah.
Turning to, what do we have next here? Barracks Road?
So we can skip through these because we've done them.
Hey, good.
So it kicks us to Gallery Court. This was a proposal that was, again, so the mapping logic suggests this site should be the CX5. It was noted that a previous decision approved a 7-story building at this site.
And with the shared use path mapping logic change that I made up just now, well, a couple days ago, but I told you all about right now, similar to the nice shared use path over here, we will eventually have the Emmett streetscape if we can ever get it out to bid. And then it will be an amazing bike ped experience all the way up Emmett to Barracks, including in front of Gallery Court.
Can you clarify where this is? I don't.
It's kind of that one island that UVA hasn't bought, kind of next to Lambeth on Emmett.
The burned down hotel.
The burned down
Burned
motel,
down
yeah,
hotel,
yeah.
yeah.
That, I should have just named the item, burned down motel.
So what was the?
And it's gonna stay there.
I think, I was saying to put it to
8.
CX8, CX8 instead of CX5.
What's it adjacent to?
It's adjacent to kind of nothing.
Is that what?
Can
Yeah,
you-
it doesn't, I mean, they'll probably
Student
continue with
housing,
this
Lambeth,
anyway.
Field apartment.
This would be the hotel.
Well,
But yeah, right next to,
It's two parts.
just south of the tracks, across from Lambeth.
the other relevant context is, as others have mentioned, this is the only parcel not owned by UVA. And you never know, but I think the owner of this parcel is very serious in intent on developing it as a non-UVA owned entity.
That's what they've been saying since it burned.
Mr. Mitchell, thoughts on this one? The island.
Nothing of value to add.
Mr. Duranzia?
I'm not sure I've got much to add either on CX5, CX8 even, but yeah.
Well, what is the recommendation being made at? Isn't it shown as CX?
It's
shown-
5 right now, I'm saying
Bringing it
8
up.
because if they build it into the SUP, it's gonna be basically a CX8 building anyway, and so that it matches and.
But the SUP is already approved, correct?
Yeah, they can do it regardless. This is just it feels like it would match and not be a non-conforming
I see.
building, yeah.
Yeah,
Ms. Russell?
I don't have an opinion.
Mr. Schwartz?
Yeah, 8 sounds great.
Mr. Stolzenberg? Okay. Mr. Palmer? This is very much in your backyard. This is sort of in your yard.
Just keep it CX5.
He says RA and then we can buy it cheaper.
Yeah, actually, but actually,
Like,
Say CX5 is more in line with, some of the planning that's being done in Highland Corridor. But we've already talked about that when the site plan came for review.
thank you. I am sympathetic to that, but given that it's already approved, I think 8 is more reflective of what will happen. Mr. Payne?
I mean, the SUP is already approved, so CX8 to match that makes sense to me. I mean, there's going to be the massive data center there, and I think it would be good to have something that's not UVA there, because at least we'll know we're getting tax revenue.
Mr. Pinkston?
Where's the data center going there?
Data science center.
Data
Not-
science center,
that
data
was-
science.
Right
Threw me
across
for a
the
loop for a
street.
second.
It's a 4-story building.
It's right across the street.
And the Performing Arts Center and the hotel
And there's a beautiful garage over here.
Right across from Marymount.
Another beautiful garage in
Understood.
this area.
Got it.
It's the
I know
Burndale
where
Hotel.
SDS is.
That's
I didn't know what a data
clear.
center.
now the
data center.
Corndown Hotel.
Mr.
When
Pinkston?
did they tear it down?
I don't have strong feelings on
Oh, I missed
it. I would go with what Mr. Payne just, you said 8, Michael?
CX8 to match the SUP, and sounds like UVA doesn't want that, so.
Oh, my word.
Ms. Perry?
Jeez.
Well, now. Well, Mr. Palmer over here makes a good point. I think I'm going with him.
And remind me again, Bill, why CS5 works.
Because it's on the map already.
It's on the map already.
I see. You're such a good point.
Whatever.
Mayor Smith?
8.
I believe we are good on this one. Next.
All right, this one, the old Martha Jefferson Hospital site. So, this one shows up on the map as NX8. Again, this is one where it was suggested that it should be NX10. The mapping logic, because this is not a downtown street in our streets at work plan, takes you to 8.
Mr. Mitchell?
10's cool with me.
Mr. Duranzio?
Me too.
Can you just point at the parcel for me?
Yeah, it's this.
Right
all
there.
this- Well, technically it's 2 parcels here, but this is a big parking lot. This is the CFA Institute. This is where I work.
Thank you.
This is the garage.
Okay.
You work in the garage or in the apartment? Let's be clear.
Ms. Russ?
So our mapping logic that we've expanded from downtown to now 29, and now we're saying that this should also abandon that mapping logic. I do not support that.
Mr. Schwartz?
We've got NX10 almost catty corner to it, so it's not really extending it out that far. It does make me wonder if those other parcels that are between Maple and Lexington should also be NX10 if we make this NX10.
Tarleton Oak.
Yeah, exactly, which
Yeah.
actually I think that maybe
They
in a
did write a
comment
letter
that was,
about that.
should all be the same zoning. But yeah, I have no problem with NX10 in this location.
Mr. Stolzberg?
Well, I proposed it, so yes, but I'd also make a mapping logic argument that our Streets at Work plan is, like 10 years old now. We have the East High Streetscape project, if it can ever get out to bid, and that's gonna make this section of East High up to 10th, what I would consider much more of a downtown street, according to the Streets at Work rules. And it probably would make sense at that point to update the Streets at Work plan, at which point the mapping logic will have all made sense for this.
I just think that's too high moving away from our core downtown, not street related, more in how it speaks to the nearby neighborhood context.
Like up this neighborhood or like this neighborhood?
No,
Not the graveyard.
This neighborhood, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I can see this making the CFA parcel low or high and keeping my parcel.
Well, thinking about what's likely to happen, I don't think they're likely to tear down the CFA.
No.
They're likely to build on the parking lot.
Mhm.
So it's on the southwest corner. And it's not, my initial thought was, why would we wanna make it an X10 for the neighbors up to the north, but they're not the ones who are gonna see it. They're not gonna tear down, well, I
Well-
suppose they could tear down the parking.
Well, this is also a service parking lot and
That's
a
true.
two-story garage, but
That's true.
I think, so this is actually a parcel split down here. And I'd say this, keep the same, this one, make it 10. The
Interesting.
bottom one, which gets what you're getting at.
Uh-huh, okay. That makes sense.
Would that be split zoning then, or am I
No,
misunderstanding?
they're different parcels.
Oh,
You
okay.
can't really see the line, but it was kind of where I was,
It's
where this
there.
cursor is. It's, get real close, you can probably see
I
it.
can make it out now.
As for me, some really excellent points here. I agree with Mr. Schwartz's points about consistency in the intersection, and I agree with Mr. Stolzenberg's Berg's point that the two parcels have different dynamics. It makes more sense 10 lower and more sense 8 upper. Mr. Payne?
I don't have particularly strong feelings, but I guess my first thought is sticking with the consistency of what our logic was in maintaining an X8, but I don't have particularly strong thoughts.
Mr. Pinkston?
What does the Flums call it?
Either of these options is consistent with the land use map.
Okay, I'm good with what Rory suggested in terms of the split.
Ms. Brayer?
I got nothing.
Mayor Snyder?
I go with the split. An 8-10 split.
I think we're at, where are we?
Number
Downtown
103.
streets?
Wait, what are you, where?
The identified parcels, where are those?
These are, sorry, I probably should have put more in there, but they are down here.
Oh, that's Charlton Oak, right?
No,
No?
these are streets down here, this little
Oh,
spot right here.
the island.
Oh, that one. Oh, this guy. The Beck Cohen building.
Oh, yeah.
It is just a weird
Right
little
by the
island
bridge.
there.
It's
I
a
get the
weird-
logic, but it's weird.
Is that owned by Sierra Club?
All it is, it's a weird little
That's,
island
I think
because
it's-
of the strict application of logic.
And
It's a little too short. But I get it. But it's.
So again,
It's
same issue. The logic rules designated these parcels in the 8. The suggestion's being made that they should be 10, like everything that's kind of adjacent to them.
That's what that Cohen is.
The only thing that's not adjacent,
Mm-hmm.
the only thing that's adjacent to them that's not is the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Mitchell, was that clear?
No, I don't know where we are.
So it's right under the Belmont Bridge.
Yeah.
So this is Champion, and then this is like the
Oh,
Beck
yeah,
Cohen
yeah,
parking
yeah,
lot.
okay.
Yeah, he had to orient it by ear taps.
And you're wanting to revise that to C.
Suggestion, I mean, full disclosure, was Rory's suggestion.
Just match everything else
The
all
strict-
around.
The strict
This one-
application of the rules, because it doesn't actually front on these downtown streets, because it was an intervening street, the strict application of the rules landed it.
Oh, but that street won't exist anymore soon.
Why?
It's getting removed as part of the Belmont Bridge. Old Avon, it's gone.
So he interrupted you, what were you saying?
Sorry.
So strict application.
Of the mapping
Be
logic,
consistent.
put it in the 8, it's being suggested for the 10.
Just as a contiguity argument?
So it can be contiguous to all the other 10?
Yeah, it's just a weird. It's different.
Contiguity, I can't say that word, is, makes sense.
And it's you want it contiguous, you want it to be at 10.
Mr. Duranzio?
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Stolzenberg. Let's take it 10.
Ms. Russell?
I'm not going to vote for the demise of the Beck Cohen Historic Barn. I think that's a iconic Charlottesville historic building. If anything, we should consider protecting it. Here's a picture of it in 1917.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I hear that.
But it does have a big parking lot thing in the back.
And the
Also, it's in
bridge
the
house-
historic district, and I think it's contributing, so.
Yeah, no, it's contributing.
So there's still-
If it's not an IPP already, it's contributing.
Mr. Schwartz?
10 seems appropriate. Again, with the understanding that we're probably not gonna allow demolition of that building.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
Yeah, I changed my argument from it's a weird island to there is no more Old Avon, so it does fit the math and logic to change it as of last year.
But how do you know you're not tearing the barn down?
They're saying it's in the
BAR
historic
approval,
district.
Yeah,
Needed.
and things have been torn down in historic districts before. I'm not saying Charlottesville, but they have been.
So I guess, to your point, and a really important point is, people can always request demolition, and there's a process for that, and it's a 2-year process. And if, they can't sell it at a market rate to someone who preserve it, or if the city doesn't buy it, they can tear things down. So that's something that we risk in every historic district.
And that's, I mean, irrelevant to whether it's 8 or 10, too.
In that
Yeah.
case, anyway, yeah.
Mr. Palmer?
Good ways.
I agree, 10. Mr. Payne?
I really don't have strong thoughts. I mean, again, I think the most relevant policy question is if that level of intensity means that kind of business, something like Barney's Burritos, Champion is, the writing's on the wall in terms of that never existing again. But for this, I really don't have a strong feeling on it one way or the other.
Mr. Pinkston?
No strong feelings. I mean, if it makes it more consistent to have it as 10, I'm fine with that.
Ms. Perry?
Leave it the way it is.
Mayor Snow?
Slight preference for 10, not gonna throw a fit either way.
Next up, I see, what do I see?
So number 135, this is at the intersection of Stadium, JPA, and Emmett. So,
That weird one.
again, key intersection, it was identified as CX8. As we get to this image on the map, we're winding our way there now. Give us a moment, there we go. You can zoom in a little bit for us. So the CX8 was, so we're looking at the parcel, if you can see Woodrow Street on there. CX8 was designated between basically Stadium or Emmett and Woodrow, right? So Woodrow Street doesn't exist. And the argument being made by the individual making this request is basically suggesting that because all of these parcels are in common ownership and have been for quite some time, that the entirety of this area should go into the CX8 designation. So, all the way back to Montebello.
Is this the stone house?
Yep.
Yes, it is.
And you've got a 60-foot grade drop from Montebello?
You do. Yeah, it's a very dramatic grade drop there.
What do you mean from? You
From
mean like-
Montebello, the street behind Montebello Circle, down to the parcel in question.
So like, right here is just a giant hill.
Yes, and it's
Like,
going
so
down.
just, you know, right, the buildings are at the bottom of the hill, and they're pretty close to the lot line.
Yes.
Mr. Mitchell?
So, CS8 from a consistency.
Did you say 8?
Yeah, I mean, that street doesn't exist.
Oh, I see, it's just.
Well, it does exist.
Well, on paper.
No,
It's a paper street.
You can drive down it, it's basically a series of driveways that are connected. But it, you know, there's a sign at each end.
Oh, it has a
The
street sign?
sign says Woodrow Street.
Actually, I didn't
I
know.
didn't see it.
Is
The
there?
argument that if a piece of land is traversable, and we put signs at each end, it's a street.
No, it's also in public ownership.
Even if it does exist, yeah. it's
Should we
probably
open a
CS8.
phenomenology textbook?
I'm just,
Mr. Dronzio?
yeah, 10 for consistency.
10?
8, I'm sorry, 8 for consistency.
Ms. Russell?
Consistently inconsistent.
I don't feel like I know enough about this opine, but it seems like if it's not a street, zoning should be contiguous. I mean, I guess the question is that the appropriate zoning?
And it goes back to that point that you made earlier, James, about like based on like as well, right?
I don't know if that's the case here.
I mean, if the street did exist.
There is a street, it exists,
Where is this rock house?
right there on
It's in the
corner.
CX8 part.
You can't see it, it's hidden by the bushes.
In the 104?
Yes,
Okay,
that's it.
so
And where'd you guys land on that?
emails that we've gotten about
It
that are
is
not really
deferred.
relevant to this conversation.
But you were at the right place, you can't see it because it's covered by the
Yeah.
bush. Sure, whatever.
Ms. Russell?
I don't know, if it's a question of the technicality of the street, I don't know,
Mr. Schwartz?
So, I think I had brought this one up as well. I think CX8 across Woodrow Street makes sense. I think it also makes sense extending down JPA, but what, I guess my question or concern is, I feel like the drawings that we've gotten recently for buildings along JPA work in the sense that you have a very tall building on JPA and it ends up being 2 or 3 stories when it reaches Montebello. And if CX8 creates that, that makes sense to me. When the architects came in and we're all looking at our zoning code, I think they were arguing that it would, what I don't know is appropriate is having 8 stories on Montebello and then having the building step down and it's 8 stories on JPA. That doesn't make any sense to me, so I don't know how we.
And that, so this area is the one that took us to this question of actually doing split zones.
And I think that makes sense if we can do that all along JPA.
Right. And that's, so JPA in particular, but we're looking to see if there's other places where that same rule might need to apply, but JPA is where we're definitely looking at that issue.
But Carl, is what you're
Because-
saying is because it's all on ownership, a developer could abandon the Woodrow Street and then have more flexibility to build something that does work in that corridor by having not the split zoning between the two?
Well, no, I think in this favor, I'm in favor of split zoning on the parcel itself. So, I think the CX8 should happen, but when you get close to that hillside, I think we need to do something so there isn't an 8-story building on Montebello. Because I think the way you can fuss with the code in a way that it lets you step the building with the topography. And so yeah, you could get an 8-story building on Montebello and it steps down and it's 8 stories on JPA. And I don't think that's good. So, yeah, if we can do split zoning that, make it CX8, but make it CX5 for a strip along Montebello.
Well,
or 3
we'd
or
actually
whatever.
match, we would match the
RX3.
RX3
Okay.
at the top of the slope.
For a whatever portion in
Yeah.
that would allow for something modest.
So something that would work with the topography to let you, do that.
Yeah, that
Well,
makes sense.
we were looking at something just in the last month on that, where the discussion, there's a building that we were looking at, that the proposal was to have like 5 stories on JPA and like 2 stories on
Yes,
Montebello.
yep, you're exactly right. Yep, and that project is one that we've spent a lot of time understanding, how this zoning would apply to that. And that was one of the ones that architects brought forward for us to look at, and is leading to this conversation around this transition issue.
I mean, it seems to me that ought to be sort of de facto for everybody along
Yes,
Montebello.
exactly, yes.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
I mean, I think I agree with that, right? Is you don't want to have an 8-story building fronting Montebello. At the same time, I think all of this, given the topography change, makes sense for a lot of height, like we were talking about with that 1709 or whatever proposal the other month, day, week, whatever. So I mean, I think if you did something like that, like with that RX3 over here, and then that much more intense zoning facing JPA, I think that's a good idea. I'd also, I mean, I don't know, I think it does kind of matter, right? In terms of like where homeowners live versus where students live, pretty much all the other parcels along there are occupied by renters, by student renters, presumably, except for, these 2 that happen to be right next to the one we're talking about, and at least one of which is owned by some somewhat litigious people. I think over here it makes plenty of sense to have all that height as well. We want to fit the students in there. so that they stop sprawling out into all the other neighborhoods. I think it's a great place to do it, given the topography change all along there.
Mr. Palmer? Next door.
I agree with Carl. I do think we want height there. I think conceptually, but we wouldn't want unintended consequences to create it right on Montello. So anything that can help to codify that is good. I did want to ask questions. I think Carl brought it up at one point. There's a corner lot next to the stone house can't be developed or something. Is that kind of a moot point at this point? Is that still the case? I didn't understand.
It's basically by agreement with the city. So the city could presumably unagree, or could agree to.
You as the council have to unagree, is that like a formal agreement?
That's right.
And then if they wanted to build at Woodruff, if anyone wanted to build at Woodruff Street, they'd have to get official street closure and go through that process as well.
Yeah.
Of course, give notice to all the property owners who are one entity.
They will notice.
I mean, the only other thing, think about in the future, that pork chop there at Stadium Road, whether that's condition there, or if that's another thing like that, very unprecedented.
I agree with what is being said. I think that 8 stories makes a lot of sense fronting on JPA, and I agree that we need to be smart about how we address Montebello. And I agree that what Mr. Stolzenberg is saying is that a lot of those same dynamics continue along JPA on both sides of the slope. Mr. Payne?
I agree with what Commissioner Schwartz had said.
Mr. Pinkston?
I'm with Carl.
Ms. Brady?
I vote for Carl.
Mayor Snow?
They did something
Same.
right.
Well done, sir.
We're trying to redeem you from
I know.
by your neighbors. I mean, we're doing the best we can.
I think I'm irredeemable.
I think we're back to West Main.
We're trying.
I think we've covered West Main, have we not?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
did.
you
did.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
You did.
Let's jump again.
All right, so
Oh,
this
no.
takes us then to the question really at the top of the problem with doing these out of order is my page is all end up out of order.
That's okay.
I'll call this
There we
page
go.
two.
Page, yes. So these are the zoning map changes requiring a amendment to the future land use map. Broadly, these came to us in two types. The first of these, and if you guys have all looked at the spreadsheet we gave you, there's a number of requests around reducing the zoning designations that are the medium intensity zoning designations, the RB and the RC being reduced down to RA. Now, when we come back to when we were creating the map, we dug into this issue. We looked at what is the recommendation for medium intensity. If you remember, the future land use map said the medium intensity should allow up to 12 units on a lot. And part of our conversation was really looking at this question of, with our objective of incorporating into these districts, in these land use areas, house-scaled buildings. You can do a house-scaled building in 12 units. It's not a question of whether you can or can't do that. You can do that, but it's certainly much more of a design challenge. And with the feedback of what we had heard from the community, we made the call to establish the zoning districts at the R6 and the RB and the RC, the two zoning districts identified to implement the medium intensity at 6 units in the RB and 8 units in the RC. We felt that was a reasonable compromise. And then when we then went through and looked at that issue and had our conversations with our various colleagues around infrastructure, we didn't arrive at any areas that were identified for medium intensity that necessarily needed to be walked back from that medium intensity designation to a general residential. So That's our conclusion on that point. And so our question for you at this point is, are there remaining concerns about the RB or RC designations in the city that we should be addressing in some way?
Well, let's go around. Mr. Mitchell?
The medium intensity, designating RB, RC 8, 6 and 8 is fine with me. What are we doing with RA again? Nothing, right? RA
Nothing.
remains as it is.
RA remains as it is.
Mr. Durantia?
Impacted the affordability bonus on this?
I'm sorry?
The
Impact of
affordability
the
density, what's
affordability.
what's the impact on that?
On the double density, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Well,
Both, I guess both of them would be factored in here, right?
yeah, I mean,
So you do,
I'm not sure I understand the question. What do you mean by impact of
Well,
that?
if we're going back to 6, that's.
No, this is where we are right now, right?
yeah.
6 and 8.
8, yeah, we're 6 and 8.
I'm not thinking about, I'm thinking about that in terms of the base zoning district, not the bonuses
Okay, that's
attributed to
fine.
affordable housing.
Okay.
The bonuses, I think, are gonna be
Totally
still
different.
very, very rare
Right.
occurrences, and we talked about reducing that from where it was before to, I think, a maximum of 12 units.
Okay, that's fine, I'm good to go then. Just want clarity on that.
Yeah.
Ms. Russell?
This makes me remember a comment from a member of the public, Jean Hyatt. She's with Preservation Piedmont, and she was specifically concerned with some RX3 zoning. RX3, Piedmont's R3. Upper part of Preston Avenue. Historically African-American community with small block of very small affordable homes on the east side and further along the west. Two important African-American communities. I haven't looked at this, and just like, this is prompting that. In response to your question, I would be interested in looking at that.
Mr. Schwartz?
I guess I'm not really sure I understand the question as far as how we're defining RB and RC. I'm fine with that. As far as mapping questions, I do have kind of.
Are there
Weird
areas, are there areas that you've
So-
either, based on the comments we
Mhm.
received or otherwise your look, where you feel like we need to be re-looking at that, and some indication as to the basis for that would be helpful.
Well, and so I'm trying to understand the basis of, so we've got RB extending up Park Street, and then it stops, and it becomes RA, and then we hit the 250 bypass, and it goes up to RB again. And I don't understand the logic for the break there, and why we're pushing density north of the bypass versus south. Similarly, we have RB extending along Lexington, which doesn't go anywhere. It just kind of dead ends into, doesn't dead end, but it goes into RA neighborhoods. Why are we not putting the RB on Locust? And again, north of the bypass, we've got RB starts up again. I'm not sure I understand the logic that's
Right,
going
so-
on there.
So, yeah, all of this is based on the land use map,
Mhm.
So I would be going back to what the designations were and why they were designated the way they were on the land use map itself. I
Okay.
can go back and find that out. I will say that part of what is driving the designations of the medium intensity was to establish areas within every neighborhood of the city where there was this opportunity for these types of this housing type to happen.
And I get that, and that feels a little bit more arbitrary than designating a corridor that goes out to another corridor. So it
So you're
feels,
referring to the gap in the Park Street, right? So
Right.
it's less that there's a concern about north of the bypass being designated that,
Mhm.
and more about why is there a
yeah,
gap?
why is there a gap on Park Street, and why have we not looked at Locust, south of the bypass?
Right,
Just seems very odd to me.
okay.
Yeah. And similarly, I don't understand what we're getting out of Lexington.
Mhm.
Okay. Mr. Stoltenberg?
Yeah, so, well, I guess, one very limited point, is that I'm still a little confused about how within the mapping logic that we do use, we ended up with, this and maybe the one by CHS, that, we have intersecting framework streets and we didn't follow the, X hundred feet from the intersection rule. That and, you know, that isn't square and could be square. But those are the only things I have within the FLUM, or without changing the FLUM, right? And then on the question of, you know, where would you put the medium intensity zoning districts if, you know, I were dictator? You know, I might have a couple tweaks, but I'm very sympathetic to the points that staff made in the memo about how we had a whole thing in
Yes.
2017 through 2021, and, you know, had this whole public process with community engagement, and I don't know that reopening that can of worms is the right move. If you guys want to reopen the can of worms, I'd be happy to make some suggestions, but at this point, I'd just like to hear the discussion on that.
When the future land use map was adopted 2 years ago, council spent maybe 30 seconds discussing it. And we were told we were not gonna discuss it, we were gonna talk about it now.
And I think, correct me if your understanding was different, but I think the understanding in passing it was that the future land use map was a long-term maximum build-out. It did not mean that what the future land use map would be the zoning designation in the zoning rewrite, which is another piece of context for it.
So,
I don't even know whether you all sweated bullets over it 2 years ago. I don't remember being at any meetings where you all spent more than a little bit of time on it. I don't think anybody in city government 2 years ago at any public meeting spent any significant amount of time deciding these lots and not those lots get the designation for medium intensity residential.
I hate to say this, well, I mean, it's gotta be done, but there are numerous sort of individual, I mean, there's a parcel by parcel run that still needs to be done on a lot of this. And I can give an example of that, there was a comment for comment number 4, which is the first or second one listed in the ones for changing the FLUM, that's bang on target. If we can take a look at that. Can we go to the shops at Stonefield and Hydraulic?
Yeah.
Cool. So, this is sort of as an entry corridor, and it isn't anymore. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Okay, if you go down, just to bring us down just a little bit. A little more. Other way, other down.
Other down?
Other down. Other down, a little bit more centering Cedar Hill with this is what I'm talking about here. So, this is sort of designated to be a primary, neighborhood primary road. It isn't. So 20 years ago, at North Berkshire, wasn't even a through street. There was it dead ended here, and you could not get through. You'd walk through. And then, when the shops went in, at this point here, on city property, we have a triangular island. And that was done very sensibly, because there's a light here to stop people from going shops at Stonefield, crossing, driving down Cedar Hill Road, and to avoid getting to the hydraulic and such. So this was blocked. So the only way you can get out of Cedar Hill, you can turn right, period. If you want to get onto Cedar Hill, you gotta be coming from the west to get in. So this really is no longer a through street, number 1. Number 2, all of these parcels here, if we zoom in on this, those are all single-family affordable residences now. They were they're single-family residences that were zoned B1, but people live in them. Right there is what used to be Tom Jackson's State Farm, which is a house. These are houses and duplexes. These are houses and duplexes. They're all in the affordable. This is all in the sensitive area here. I don't think I don't think anything involving sort of the streets at work is outdated for this. This isn't a through street anymore. And if we put these as, what have we got, these 5s now?
CX5.
CX5s. What we're gonna essentially do is turn this street into a high traffic area through a sensitive area.
So,
Could we put
put pause on this one, finish the last one, and then get to this?
Yeah, because that's jumping up even from
Like, we will get there.
medium intensity.
Right, well, I guess my point here is that the initial logic used for this was to follow the prior land use map. The prior land use map was wrong about what was happening here, and the streets at work is wrong about what was happening
Thank you. Back to, God, where were we?
Yeah, we're,
Designation of
RBRC.
medium intensity and how it got.
Medium intensity broadly, yes, yes, yes.
oh, yeah.
And we were at, Mr. Pinkston, please. Medium intensity, mapping issue, concerns.
A lot of this, Lyle, I'm listening to what's being discussed because I wasn't following this that closely, 2 years ago. Just, James, if you could help me, so 12 had been mentioned, and now you guys are saying 8 and 6?
Yeah.
Okay. And the whole notion about the bonus density or whatever, we're just kind of setting that aside right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question right now is how I feel about the 8 and 6.
Yeah, the RB and the RC and.
I feel like those are good numbers, and I'm glad we're coming down from 12. In terms of where they are throughout the city, I would be interested in knowing what the, what the bases were when you did the future land use map.
Okay.
Ms. Prager.
I too saw something that Ms. Hyatt had written regarding the area on Rose Hill, Amherst, Concord, Cynthiana. And I too am concerned about how designations from A to B to C or C to B to A will impact these homeowners. And whatever has to be done to protect them, we need to do.
Thank you. Mayor Snook?
Well, as I said before, I think I'll just go back to what I said 2 years ago, where I thought it would be a good idea for us to acknowledge that there could be what we would now call an RB or an RC. But I said 2 years ago that without having done any sort of individualized look at any individual lots, that it was foolish for us to designate anything. And so if this is now the first opportunity that we have certainly the first opportunity council will have had to have discussed any of this. My initial thought is, and I think we have to keep in mind that what we are already doing in RA by, in essence, tripling the number of units that are possible to be built there, is already going to put us in one of the most liberal, most growth-oriented, most highest density zoning plans in the country. And personally, I want to go very slowly in deciding where we would put RBs or RCs at all. And I say that for a couple of reasons. The first is that we've got folks who are freaking out over the fact that their street is now designated, the entire street is RB, and they're all thinking, gee, I'm gonna have 6 units on each one of these places on my street, and suddenly they're going from 10 units to 80 units, or to 60 units on their street. And although we can tell them until we're blue in the face, no, don't worry, it's not going to happen, or at least it's not going to happen all that fast. That's not a very reassuring thought to many people. And one of my thoughts was that if there were some way to ration the number of places that would have a higher density per block, per street, whatever, that would be something to think about. I'm not sure that Arlington's answer of saying we're only going to allow a certain number per year is frankly, I don't think it's legal. I would hate to rely on that as our way of doing that. My thought was perhaps we could say we would have higher density available on corner lots. That has a self-rationing effect. You don't have but so many corners. It means that there would be some spacing out of some of these places with higher density. And I think that there will be more than enough density created simply by the new definition we're giving to RA. So my overall thought is that almost every place, again, without going sort of lot by lot, most places that are designated for RV for the entire street, for example, and I'm just looking at Greenbrier because it's the area that I know best, most of those places, we wouldn't actually want every house there developed RV. And if we don't want it, then why are we putting it there? I want to figure out some way to have this growth be sort of more gradual. I want to see it be more, better spaced out. I don't want to see everything on some of these streets suddenly become available for apartment buildings of 6 or 8 units. I also think we need to go back to what we said 2 years ago, and what I told people, because I was told by Planning Commission, by the consultants, that RA was going to be house-sized developments, and that RB was going to be large house-sized developments, mansion, if you will. The only way that I can think of to accomplish that and to give people some certainty that that's really what's going to happen is to do what people have basically eschewed in this process, and that is to have some sort of a maximum size for the building. To say, for example, on an RA lot, you can do whatever you want to within a 4,000 square foot building. Have 3 units, I don't care, whatever. That may be a way to allow for the neighbors all to think, my neighborhood, when I walk down the street, is not gonna look significantly different from the way that it looks right now, and yet we can have potentially 3 times as many people there. So one of my questions that I wanted to ask was, what can we do that would actually give the folks in these neighborhoods what we promised them 2 years ago, which was RA, or we weren't calling it RA at the time, but general residential that's house-sized, or that a medium-intensity residential that is mansion-sized, but not potentially, maybe that means potentially a 4,000 square foot limit or a 6,000 square foot limit, but not a 10,000 square foot building or something like that. Is there any limit? I don't know of anything in this current draft that allows for any limits whatsoever on the size of the building.
So I can explain that for the current
Okay.
draft. So there's 3 factors that limit the size of the building. Obviously the height, the building footprint, which is defined as a percentage of the lot coverage, and then the building width provision, which is under the building massing category. Those 3 factors together basically define your height, your width, and your overall footprint, and those factors together limit your size.
Okay, so I'm trying to remember. Let's say we've got one of them where you've got a 60%
Yep.
coverage, and I'll just use my own house as an example. We've got 13,000 square foot lot. Okay, that means I got 7,800 square feet I can build on top of.
And you are limited in the width to no more, I'm assuming you're on an interior lot, in RA, I believe it's 40, no more than a 40-foot wide house. So you've got 40 feet, so you have to, that lot coverage that you're defining has to be no more than 40 feet wide, and then back from there with under the maximum building footprint.
Okay, so that, on that, I mean,
Yes.
35 feet in RA.
what, aside from the fact that my house is already
45.
illegal.
Right.
Cause it's 50 feet wide. Supposing you had a 40-foot wide building and you took it back and you could probably build it at least another 40 feet back, so now you're talking probably 50 feet back.
2,000 square feet.
2,000 square feet times however many floors,
Is 6,000 square feet or less?
something. And I think a 6,000 square foot house on my lot would probably look pretty strange. And I don't think that the neighbors would think that looked like the neighborhood that they moved into. And without, this is the sort of thing that I had asked
Yep.
that we do, sort of a lot by lot. Let's look at some examples and see what this looks like, because what I think, as I look at things and try to figure it out in my admittedly non-expert way, I keep coming up with an awful lot of potential for an awful lot of ugly kinds of buildings. So that, my overall concern is that we're, you all are going much farther, much faster than I think any of us has ever, any of us on council has ever had an opportunity to do. And you're assuming a lot of things that we have never talked about. Now, if you wanna look at specific places that are funky, one of the places is the CX-5 on Rio Road by Tarleton. You've already talked a little bit about that. I would really like to know a lot more about how that would work out in terms of transitions and so on. If you want to look at one thing that's gotten a lot of comment, where Meadowbrook Heights Road goes up to Kenwood, unless the city wants to spend a lot of money reconfiguring an intersection there, that's really not a place we want more people going through. There are some other places like that that are just really difficult. I still don't think that I understand the concept for why there would be RC at either end of Grove Road. I'm not sure what that adds to have 8 units in places like that in Grove Road. And then the corner down by where Grove and Melbourne meet. So, I mean, there are a lot of other places like that I just, when you look at the build-out potential, it gets ridiculous. And if we're not gonna have that kind of build-out potential, then why are we fooling everybody by saying we're gonna call this RB? If we don't want it, we shouldn't be writing it into the ordinance. I don't know how we ration it.
So that's why we will have an overlay map, so that we will know what could potentially go, who, what, when, where, as it relates to size. If, this lot will accommodate 4 units, or 8 units, or 6 units, or whatever, and, take my lot, it's a corner lot. What could you put on that lot if somebody tore that house down? I don't know how many square feet my house is, wide. I can tell you what the square footage is, but I don't know how wide it is, okay? I don't know how far it sits back from one corner to the next corner, okay? I can't tell you that lot size would accommodate anything other than a single-family home. But if there was an overlay map to say, if we're looking at these 2 streets, and we have A, B, or C, module 1, 2, or 3, this is what this would look like. And this is what potentially these things would look like. This is what potential density would mean. Forget about all of the subsidies and the this, that's, and the thirds, but just basically what it looked like. I mean, unless I'm a billionaire, I'm not gonna come in and bulldoze my house down and build something else on it. I'm gonna take it down to the studs and fix it and sell it to somebody else. But, but then there are some lots where you don't have that option. You'd have to do a tear down. So what would that mean? What does that look like?
I guess,
The best answer we've got is that the economics probably aren't gonna justify a lot of tear downs.
Probably not.
In which case, why are we going there?
Well, I think the idea is that we're trying to intersperse density in neighborhoods, and the only way to sort of do that is to zone it all for that, with the understanding that it doesn't all become that, because it just won't. And then, in addition to that, knowing that in 5 years, give or take, maybe give, you look at it again.
Except that it's always harder to take back rights you've given. It's damn near impossible to take back development rights you've given. Very easy to extend more development rights. Very hard to take them back. For one thing, you get one house on the lot, one house on the street that jumps immediately and suddenly changes the character of the street. And then everybody else says, well, why can't I do that? Why are you taking away that same thing from me? It's really a ratchet. It's not a two-way thing.
When, sorry, but when the city downzoned in the 90s, was that subject to a substantial number of legal challenges?
I'm not aware of many.
The city's downzoned in every major rezoning,
Yeah.
starting in 1929, right?
I don't know.
2003 debatable. There was upzoning and downzoning in that one. Everything else, yeah, all down.
I know we're thinking, so the idea of going in 5-year increments and increasing again more does make sense, but also, one of my thoughts is, what are we thinking about what we want the city to be in 20 years? Do we still want all of our single-family neighborhoods to continue to be single-family neighborhoods? And I feel like at some point, as the county continues to grow around us, as people continue to want to move to Charlottesville and the surrounding area, the logical thing is that some of these neighborhoods will not be single-family neighborhoods forever.
Correct.
And that, places that were really, like Rugby Road, or Avenue, we get a lot of, people upset about that, but maybe in 20 years, that really should not be a bunch of single-family houses. I'm just kind of asking the question. Personally, I don't think it should. I think there's a lot of the city that we do need to densify, and, the future is a lot denser for us. So do we continue to preserve these little neighborhoods now, or do we set up a process that, we get what we want 20 years from now?
So is tripling the density not enough?
No.
No, it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna do anything. And it's not tripling the density either. You can have an ADU. You can have 2 units on every one of these parcels right now, right?
And they don't.
And yours, you could subdivide too. You could have 4 units.
No, I can't subdivide, not in Greenbrier.
Legal restrictions.
Deed restriction.
I think
Sure.
one other element is, and I fully admit to this, I don't I can't, maybe someone earlier, I can't look at the module 2, height,
Right.
width, percentage, and understand how that would, apply, and feel like I can be confident that it really will result in house size buildings,
Sure.
just like we say it's going to.
Right.
I don't,
Right.
I
And we,
want to trust in that, because it's, a lot of work has gone into it, and it's a
Right.
very complex, well-articulated set of concepts. But it's hard to Mayor Stook's point, talk about how that would play out
What
in
does it,
actual.
what does it
Right.
look like? I mean,
Right.
I asked you the other day, can I put an ADU on my property? I don't know. Maybe I can, maybe I can't, but I don't know. So I'd have to trickle on downtown to the, get the permits, and somebody say, oh, nope, you can't do that on your lot. Or they would say, oh, yes, you can get the necessary permits, build it, and keep it moving. But unless you know that you can do this, are you just gonna strike out and do it? I don't know if I wanna be a
I think
landlord.
another element, I was just reading an article about, has happened in LA with ADUs, and there's a lot of people that, I think this article was talking about all the people that have decided to help address affordable housing by building ADUs on their property, and maybe it's a way of also being able to afford to live in a very expensive area by having supplemental income.
Correct.
But another thing that happens is that developers come in, buy, single-family housing, convert them into apartments
Mhm.
and potentially then lose, maybe this isn't the LA case, but I worry about it here, about losing some of those East High, naturally affordable,
Correct.
smaller, older units, and you just start to see a flip, and we do have less single-family housing potentially, but we're not getting at the affordability.
So what's
That's the
keeping
question.
that from happening today?
Um,
And I don't mean the multiple units, but just understand that right now, those smaller single-family houses are targets to be flipped into very expensive single-family houses. So what we need to compare is not the existing condition to what could happen under the new zoning ordinance, but what could happen under the new zoning ordinance versus what can happen under the existing zoning ordinance. So what can happen under the existing zoning ordinance is someone can buy many of these houses and turn them into much larger houses, right? Because we're introducing restrictions on single-family houses, the size of single-family houses that don't exist today. So
Okay.
people can buy them and turn them into large single-family houses. And what we're introducing is the notion that you can still do that, but with more limitations.
Okay.
Or you can turn it into 2, 3, 4, 6, 8 units, which are inherently going to be less expensive than that single-family
Sure.
house. So that's the comparison
Yeah.
that we need to make, because we can't take away the option, there's no way for us to take away the option of people flipping the existing houses.
No, you can't
And we
take that
know
away.
that the incomes are coming for people to buy
But you're
those because it's
presum-
happening today.
But you're presuming, I mean, I don't have, you have all kinds of density. But you're presuming that if you take the single-family home and it's 4,000 square feet, and you're gonna get 4 1,000 square foot units, that gives you four units versus the one.
Right,
That's the assumption.
right.
But there's nothing to say that you're gonna be able to do anything with those 4 once you convert it. So where's your density? I mean, you have the density based on the number, but you may not have the density based on the people.
Well,
So
the
are
idea
you-
would be
are you-
that the
are you-
market.
So are you saying that you're hoping they'll go hand in hand? I take my 4,000 square foot home and I do 4 1,000 square foot units. So now I'm out. But I'm making an assumption that 4 of you are gonna come in. But suppose only 2 of you come in, then I still have 2 units.
It's
In
pretty
the
likely
present
you'll land
environment.
whatever you got.
Yeah.
Yeah,
in the
I think it's a
present
fungible
environment,
kind of thing, right, at this point.
Yeah, if
Could I ask
you
a
own-
quick question?
If you owned a rental property right down the city, and you muttered to yourself that, I think I'm gonna rent that when I change tenants when my lease is up. By the
Mhm.
time you got down the stairs from Cityscape, either there's no one standing there, you'd have 4 people texting you about wanting to rent your place.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
I just,
Mr. Bixler.
yeah,
Anything
I
from-
get where Lloyd is coming from, and I think that this is creating a lot of angst in our community that is not gonna turn out to be what people fear, but people fear what they fear, and it's not that people are irrational, they're just,
The unknown.
it's the unknown, and I do feel like we have some sort of responsibility to give at least some, well, framework about how this might evolve. And so one thing we could say is, these areas have been designated for future, say 5 years from now, the areas that we have now marked as RB and RC. In 5 years from now, we will evaluate where things stand with all these other changes that we made and consider then ratcheting up at that point. Another thing we might consider is for these spaces, maybe we do something, these areas, maybe we do something similar to an SUP process. Given the way that it's, I mean, I get what Ms. Russell said, the idea is we want to spread these throughout the neighborhood, and these become like connecting nodes, I suppose. But given the fact that these sort of like are interlaced throughout the neighborhoods in that way, I wonder if we could set up some sort of, with your shop, James, or with us, where we evaluate potential potential projects on a case-by-case basis. I mean, I know that what we're wanting to do is make this easy enough for people who don't have to do that, but I do wonder with this particular medium intensity, I just don't think we're ever gonna be able to put parameters on this that are actionable enough for developers to know what to do and for people to not be, terrified.
So I think the problem with that though is who's gonna buy a house, sit on it for 2 years, going through a special use permit process, asking council, and then all the neighbors are gonna say, oh my God, why would you put a sixplex on my block? How dare you? And then, council denies it and nothing ever gets built, right? And nothing significant is gonna get built in RA. It's not a significant allowance over what's allowed now, and the economics of tearing down a house certainly to make 3 units work is not gonna happen. I think you have to set rules, and I think some of Mayor Snook's points about the volume and envelope of building are reasonable, but I think you need to set rules in advance. Or the thing is, for a big mid-rise building on a big corridor, it's worth going through a multi-year process of maybe you can get a contract, like an option on the land. You can hire some lawyers and we can go in front of council and wait it out. But a sixplex and 8plex, we practically don't even have people building these buildings now. That's why they call it the missing middle, right? Because we've forgotten how to build them, and in part that's because they're effectively illegal. And they're way too small scale to go through that kind of one-off, ask for permission every time and take the risk of it being denied, which, is overwhelmingly probable, I think. I think I think we are in a housing crisis. We have a severe housing shortage. And I think if you want to see any more homes built for people to live in, which I also think is an absolute imperative if you care about climate. People in the county, the carbon footprint per capita in the county is 50% higher than for the city, and that's primarily driven by transportation. And so if you care about climate, you want people to live in the city. If you care about, walkability and making your transit actually be able to support itself and have, ridership, you have to have people live in the city. If you want our neighborhoods.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm absolutely committed to the, which is why we're approving these projects, 2005 JPA. I'm on board with all of that. I'm on board with density, I'm on board with everything that you're saying. I'm just saying that this is a special kind of, whatever the term you use, a linchpin, or just the way these are distributed throughout. Maybe we just need to narrow their width, or not their width, but narrow their geographic area so that people aren't freaking out about them. Or maybe we reduce the amount of housing that's in there from what do you have now?
We've already reduced it from 12 to 6. I think if you reduce the area they're in, you're going to focus them even more and create more change in whatever you leave, right? That's kind of...
Less people complaining just as loudly.
Yeah.
James, can you inform this conversation with we've got estimates on turn rates and absorption. Can you sort of give us
the rate of change analysis, which
Right.
I think was a pretty limited look at the situation, which is one of the reasons we're revisiting that along with the inclusionary zoning analysis. So both of those things are we're gearing up to revisit, but that analysis kind of looked across the city at the parcels available, looked at the zoning, and came back with that there were, I can't remember the number, someone have it available, 100 and...
What were you working?
Not much.
Not much. On an annual basis, that there were basically 100, I think I want to say 40 lots, projects that were eligible to be used for this. I think one of the findings, and I'm not thrilled.
That was one of the questions I had asked you, which you would
Yes,
look into.
yes, 100, and I did. That was the one
That's
clear
how you
answer
got
I
the
was able to
140.
get. But the other key thing is the the key to the housing production was actually in the RB and the RC, because that's where you could do townhouses. You can't do townhouses in the RA, and townhouses are a very desirable building type. We see them, if you look at just about any of the, I shouldn't say just about any, but many of the developments that are happening. If you look at Laughlin Hill, you look outside of the city at some of the stuff that's in the county, you see they're interspersing townhouses into those single-family neighborhoods. Because townhouses are gonna be a lower cost product that are accessible for a middle income, right? I'm not gonna call that a low income, that's not an affordable housing unit, but that's a middle income unit. One of the things we are seeing is a missing middle in terms of our spread of who's finding an opportunity to live within the city.
And
So
I-
are these annual numbers?
They are.
I think another point.
Annual numbers.
Another really important point there is like, you can build all the mid-rises or high-rise in Seminole Square as you want, right? Like, the way we build those nowadays, the apartments that are in those are like either 1 or 2 bedroom units, or they're like 4 beds, 4 baths built for roommates. So if you want homes for families to live in, they're gonna have to be effectively 12 plexes or less under the building code. Any more than 4 units per story or more than 3 stories. And, you get into a type of construction where you have way fewer bedrooms, you have a lot more interior space, you gotta fill with bathrooms or giant walk-in closets or, things that cater to roommates and not families. And you're not gonna get those in the corridors.
I wanna make one more comment about these numbers that came in this rate of change report. So those are basically, those numbers are basically telling us how many lots could be used on an annual basis. It's a supply side analysis. It's not a demand side analysis. So what was interesting, I'm working on the comparison between our proposal and what Arlington passed recently, and I had the opportunity to read their rate of change analysis that they came back with. And they came back with up to 21 projects a year is what they're gonna see, and theirs was more demand-based. Arlington is a more sizable community than ours.
Demand being, okay, yeah, dumb question.
And
Assuming the developer demand.
21 projects of what size?
Well, their original proposal was up to 8, but I think this was done up to 6 units. So what they passed allows up to 6 units on every currently single-family lot across the entire county. And they came back with 21 projects a year being their analysis, their conclusion.
So I guess, Rory, your point is if we don't do something like this, the quote missing middle, we're missing.
Yeah.
There's one other element too that goes back to our sort of what we set out to accomplish in the affordable housing plan and in the comprehensive plan was to break down barriers of historically segregated single-family neighborhoods by allowing more housing types and housing options. And if we just built apartments at barracks and put everybody there, we haven't done what we really set out to do, which was sort of break these patterns.
Which makes perfect
But I
sense.
think one thing we have.
But there is no middle class, and what you just said makes perfect sense. But there is no middle class. But you're also making an assumption that there'll be people like me that can afford these units. Forget about all of the formulas for moderate income and low income. Forget about all of that. Just think, first of all, how many people that look like me could afford the market rate of the townhouse that you're building on this lot? And then, after that, you have to consider, well, you built 6 townhouses, how many of those are going to be affordable? So I could buy one, or I could rent one, okay? And so if you look at the income disparities in the city, there is no middle class. You're at 90,000 or you're at 40,000. Give me a break.
Oh, and in the current environment, if you make $90,000 a year, HUD says you're housing burdened if you buy any house in the city of Charlottesville.
Right, well, I know that. I understand
I
that.
mean, even at
But
90.
I understand that, but I'm just saying, look at the average income disparity between people that look like me and people that look like Rory and Carl.
But I mean, the goal of this is to help create a middle class. So by creating more supply, which hopefully would, assuming supply and demand still works, would help lower the costs. But, Lloyd, where do you stand on all this? I mean,
Well, the other point I want to make, let me get into that in a second. My understanding, James, is that it is not going to be reasonable to think that simply having RA lots get turned into 3 units is going to result in any affordable units for 60% AMI or lower.
Not
Is that fair to say?
Not 60%, no. It's simply the notion that those will be more affordable to someone
Right.
than the
That's what-
single-family house by
What
itself.
Keith Smith would call housing affordability. For the 100% AMI people, there are more units available. But it doesn't get us affordable housing as we know that as a phrase.
but it gets us to
Probably
miss
get
the
you to
middle,
80.
right?
Huh?
Probably get you 80,
Maybe.
market rate.
Probably.
Well, but what we're talking about in the whole affordable housing discussion is what do we have to do to get a 60% AMI or lower? The places that need subsidy. The places, the goal was supposed to be that by building these units and allowing for, an 8-plex or something like that, that you would have cross-subsidization between the market rate units and the affordable units.
No, those are
But
the
we know-
higher density.
But we know from the analysis that was done that you have to get to 9 market rate units before you begin to be able to subsidize the affordable units. And none of the discussions in RA or RB or RC gets us to that kind of cross-subsidization. So none of the RA, RB, RC stuff is likely to get us more than perhaps a handful, if that, of affordable units, of under 60% AMI units,
Without subsidy.
without subsidy. And so and I've said before, if we're expecting that the double density kind of a thing is somehow going to create additional affordable units, that's gonna require the city to put in about $1 million per project, and I just don't see that
So
happening.
Now, what the affordable housing plan, the reason the affordable housing plan made a number of statements about affordable housing, right? It said, A, we need to commit to a degree of subsidy in order to subsidize and create affordable housing, because all affordable housing at 60% of AMI or less requires some form of subsidy.
Right.
And then it identified the inclusionary zoning principle as one of an internal cross-subsidy within projects, and then we later ID'd that at 9 units and greater. The point it's making that led us to the general residential and the medium intensity residentials was primarily looking at why are we in the bind of needing to subsidize affordable housing in the first place? It's becomes, there's been an imbalance in housing production here and across the country. Like, this is the deal everyone's dealing with.
Right.
And so it basically said, let's stop that practice and start allowing the market to provide something closer to what the demand is for units in the city. So it's looking at the, everything we're doing on the affordable housing to subsidize the creation of affordable housing is attacking the symptom. That part is meant to be attacking the problem.
And the only point I wanna make is that we're not really expecting to get under 60% AMI units built in RA or RB or RC.
I think that's probably true, and I think I'm okay with that. I mean, it gets,
We just have to understand that when we're gonna get affordable units, we're gonna get them in other ways. We're not gonna get them
Right.
through those.
Yeah.
I think
through those
that's, I
processes.
think that's right, but to James's point, I think there is such an imbalance in terms of the supply that we would have to have to add so much supply to the system before you ever even see the equilibrium begin to.
And it would have to be regional.
Yeah,
Well,
Yep,
yeah.
all true.
But the primary difficulty is that at this point, construction costs, put aside acquisition costs, pure construction costs exceed the rent we would get on a voucher, on an affordable housing voucher. So your operating loss,
even before you even before you build the structure.
Yeah, but that's assuming we're talking about like 60% AMI type. I'm just thinking about a house that, 100% AMI that a person might have a chance of getting into. I am assuming that the sort of housing we're talking about being produced in these spaces would be primarily for them and not
Right.
primarily for. And I think that's a laudable goal, and, even if it does bring more people in our community who, maybe some people call part of the problem because they're moving to our city and driving up the costs. We were all part of the problem when we first moved here, right? So I guess
And they're moving
if
here
we don't
anyway,
change
right?
the
they're moving
zoning-
here anyway.
If we
So I
don't change the
guess,
zoning, the people are still gonna move here.
I guess for me,
Well-
the question is, how
They'll
do
still live
we,
here.
how do we, what do we owe the existing residents in terms of some level of comfort? And people may say, oh, this is just privilege or whatever you want to call it. It's a reality. The people that live here and have bought homes feel worried, understandably, and we can lay out all the economics of why it's not rational to feel that way, but they're concerned. Is there a way for us to put some parameters around this whole conversation to where we can ration it, to use your word, meter the supply, or have some level of control over the process so that people don't feel like it's just going to take off?
I have a thought on that, actually. So what we did with West Main in 2003, we upzoned West Main quite a bit, trying to encourage development on West Main. And we got development on West Main, and we freaked out, so we downzoned West Main.
Mm.
We could do that. If we get too much development on any specific street, we could change the zoning,
Mm.
just like we did on West Main.
James, you had mentioned earlier the discussion of a demand side analysis as opposed to supply side. Do you see any room where that creates a different framework for thinking about it or crafting the policy? I'm just throwing that out there.
I mean, that's just trying to analyze how is the market gonna respond to, the change in zoning? That's all that's doing. It's not necessarily gonna help us, it's not gonna help us craft a solution that does kind of this phasing or rationing thing. That's just trying to get as best as we can estimate right now, a realistic estimate of what's the actual rate of change gonna look like. Every indication is that that's pretty low. I mean, so the RA is basically an infill district. It's basically saying where there's a vacant lot, or where there's a backyard that can accommodate an ADU, where there's that kind of space, it's opening up the opportunity for additional housing to be built. RB and RC are where you might see townhouses come in, where there's an existing.
So it sounds like RB and RC are, and I'm sorry, I'm still just coming to terms with this whole debate, I apologize. But it sounds like RB and RC are conceptually important because they give this special kind of housing that you're talking about that you can't really get anywhere else.
Yes.
Okay, so I see that, and I wonder, okay, we say that's a value, I think all of us would be on board with that as an important type of housing to produce. Is there a way with the areas that we've identified as RB and RC that we say that is our sort of aspiration for 10 years from now? But that we say, basically, we'll set a plan of every 2 years, we expand the geographic reach based off a certain set of criteria. Is that a way to give us the flexibility to let this sort of, kind of like a flame that you kindle, let it sort of it's the wrong analogy, but some way of sort of letting it get started and proving to people that it's not going to ruin their lives, while also giving it a chance.
I don't think you can plan in 2-year chunks. I think that
It's just not how our zoning tools are set up.
It's not how they're set up.
Well,
It's
what's
not,
the-
it's not.
what's a
the s-
good time?
Well,
Five years?
I think that the pitfalls of that are that, if it is absolutely necessary to change the plan because there is now evidence on the ground that, and I know it's controlling a system by feedback and not in anticipation. So, any engineers listening, I'm sorry to do this, but if something has gone seriously wrong, right? In the sense that, okay, this RC section is a nightmare for whatever reason it is developed in a way we didn't plan, the chairman's right. Then you just look at this and say, we need to stop further development of this type and take action to correct it. I am under no illusions that we are going to craft a zoning ordinance that is going to be impervious to error and perfect. I expect that 3 years from now, there's going to be a revision. I have no idea what we're going to revise. And we'll fix it. But we gotta, I think we gotta take the big jump first.
The folks in this room can agree that we would do that and be comfortable with it. I think other people listening and the people that are writing this are like, I don't believe it.
Okay.
Once you've I believe it, but I don't think they would.
How far do you have to go to mollify every last person who has concerns, right?
I'm not trying to
Versus
mollify every
setting.
last person. I'm talking about a significant cross-section of our populace, which is what the mayor is.
And I'm talking about,
refracting.
and I'm talking about all the people who are getting priced out of our city, or who can't find a place to live, or are paying way too much in rent. Because if you have a city where you only have houses that start at $500,000, and our median house right now is at $450,000.
Correct.
And then you have a handful of units that you subsidize at 60% AMI at 40% less than the median income, then you don't have a middle class, because there's
Right.
nowhere for them to live.
There isn't.
And that's, why this is important, and why it really needs to stay in, or you're saying that we're gonna have alternatingly, some so-called protected neighborhoods, because a vocal minority has said they don't wanna see any change. And then, some fish bowls, some shoe boxes that you've put people into on corridors and students. And then you've had, a handful of inclusionary units in those and whatever we can get from our affordable housing subsidies. And then you've got no middle class.
Right.
I'm a little confused on one of the points you made about
That makes two of us.
the number of people. I mean, if you measure that by emails and conversations, it's a minuscule fraction of the population. They're loud.
I'm not, and I'm not in the position and I'm not going to try to defend why I feel like that it's reasonable to say that there's a large subset of people that are concerned about this. There are, and they may be, of a class or a privilege or whatever that have kind of got it, from one set of perspectives, have arrived, but they still have they're bringing legitimate concerns that we have to engage with. And even if, and I largely agree with your point, I have 3 adult kids who I'm helping fund their journey into adulthood, and they're struggling because of what you just mentioned, so I'm on board with it. But the mayor's point is still a good one. We've got, I don't know, at some point, I guess as elected officials, we'll just have to bite whatever bullet, we decide we need to bite, but that's not the most apt way of putting things. But
It's okay, we got it.
But I can understand the mayor's anxiety about R, B, and C, and maybe where y'all landed 2 years ago or whenever is just where we are, and we just need to forge ahead. And like Lyle said, we do have the option a couple years from now, after this next election, we might have people turn that dial down, I don't know, but it is a democracy, and people could have a different perspective and dial it back.
I want to just touch on one thing. at least on, my neighborhood listserv, I am the guy who has been telling people, when you all talk about, we have to protect our neighborhood from change, I've said no. That is not gonna happen. Nobody is taking Greenbrier off the list. Nobody's gonna protect Greenbrier and push everybody, push all development elsewhere. This is a city, it is one city, you are a part of it, and we are all going to share in the solution. Now, I believe that. I also believe that when we are tripling potentially the number of units that can be built, we are providing an opportunity for a fair amount of that kind of growth to happen. And we don't know really what's gonna happen when that happens. And we don't know whether we're going to see the flood that people are concerned about, or whether we're going to see it trickle, or whether we're gonna know even in if 5 years have gone by and not much has happened, then we know that we've got to do something different. We were told, again, using the metaphors given to us by the consultants, just as the first metaphor was the house-sized or the mansion-sized building, and the other metaphor was the notion of the dials that we can turn up as we need to. Now, the metaphor was often, or you could turn them back. As I've said, I don't think that's as easily done as some people would think it is, where you just go, just tweak it year to year. But the point is that you can, we try it for a while, we tweak it if it's not working, and that's fine. But I'm looking at, for example, and not simply because this is where we've been getting a lot of emails from, but the area that is at the intersection of Rose Hill Drive and Rugby Avenue, where there are about 40 houses there, 40 lots that have been designated in this draft to be RC, surrounded by RB, further surrounded by RA. But there are these 40 that are RC. And if we assume that there is a reason why those would be designated RC as opposed to RB or RA, if we assume it's not a random process, we know what we're doing, we can reasonably assume that some of those 40 are likely to get more development. It's a concentrated area. We would be getting a concentration within a quarter of a mile of that intersection. And potentially for the people who live in that area right now, or perhaps even better, the people who live right next door to that area, they're concerned. The question is, do we care? Does it bother us if everybody in that area says, I'm gonna go ahead and build out my 8-plex? Or is that something we don't want to have happen? If we want to ration it in some way, we don't want that to happen, why would we want to create the permission for that to happen? And I just want to figure out if there is a way that we can slow that down to say, I mean, it may be that 30 years from now, that's the ultimate best course for that neighborhood. I think that certainly the people who are living there right now wouldn't think so. But if we took some steps in that direction, and then 5 years, 10 years from now, the people who are there might say, okay, that wasn't the end of the world. Now let's try a little bit more. I've lived in a number of cities where the notion of density is significantly, a lot more dense in that way than Charlottesville, but Charlottesville is already the 3rd densest place in the state of Virginia, behind only Alexandria and Arlington. And we've already got a fair amount of density, but in some of these areas, like the Rugby Avenue area, the density is not low enough to have, it's not high enough to provide for a lot of commercial opportunities and so on. But if we're sort of thinking about what the city is gonna look like in 30 years, if we're envisioning this notion that there will be neighborhoods that have some neighborhood commercial opportunities, for example, as would be permitted in an RC. You talk to people right now, they're gonna say, oh my God, every place in Rugby Avenue here, there's gonna be a pizza parlor on the ground floor or whatever. And so we get a lot of that kind of stuff. But we're not there yet.
So-
And, you know,
I'm thinking about loud here, to think about, you know, how to possibly figure out where we move from here. So you referenced Arlington, they did that demand side analysis, and it was what,
21 to
21 for 20?
19 to 21 projects
Okay.
a year was their estimate.
So 19 to 21 projects for a locality of 26 square miles and 240,000 people. So presumably Charlottesville's would be less, or certainly not dramatically more than that. And I think, Lloyd, would you agree that for Charlottesville, a number like 15 to 20 would be a reasonable rate of change to kind of address the concerns you're hearing from communities and that you have yourself?
It's 15 to 20 projects.
Correct.
Statewide.
Sorry, yeah, projects.
Right.
I don't really have a good way to
Yeah, I'm
respond
just,
to that.
the point being is if you have a policy focus, I don't know what it would be or if it's even possible,
Right.
but it may address some of the concerns as well as make it clear to the community the scale of the rate of change that will happen and will be allowed to happen.
So Arlington did set a cap on the number of permits that they grant under this new missing middle zoning,
75 or something.
58.
Yeah.
And they came up with that because 58 is 1/3 of the number of single-family permits that they issue in the same zoning districts in, last year. So that's how, 58 is like, how'd they come up with 58? What a random number. It's precisely 1/3 of the number of single-family permits from the year before.
It's 2 times 29.
Right, there you go. And so their decision was, well, we even decide how many of these we might actually get. We want no more than 1/3 of the new projects, and most of these are tear downs in Arlington because it's largely a built-out community. We want no more than 1/3 of the tear downs in the county to be missing middle, up to 6 units. So that was their approach.
So why can't we do that? Is that what
Well,
you're worried
so
about?
the big question is the legality of it, and they honestly didn't have an answer when I spoke with them on it. They said, we're
We'll
relying
find
on,
out.
well, yeah, basically, they said, we're relying on the fact that we did this before, because when they adopted an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit ordinance, they put a cap on that, on an annual basis, and then that cap, after a couple of years, they just dismissed the cap, because they never got to it.
It seems
So-
like a decent approach.
And no one's going to challenge it unless we hit the cap, at which point there'll be litigation and we could, if we are actually hitting these targets that we don't think we're going to hit, we could at that point change, what's allowed before the cap gets overturned. So.
Well, and there would be a severability clause anyway, so it wouldn't,
Right, so it still seems like it serves the purpose, right? Where if you hit the cap, you stop issuing permits, someone sues. While that's happening, you have the time to revisit the rules that were hitting the cap because nobody really thinks that we're gonna be hitting 59 per year or whatever, 58.
Right, again, as a locality that's less than half the geographic area and 1/4 the population, I mean, we're certainly gonna be meaningful lower than Arlington's estimates.
I mean, Lloyd, if that were legal, is that something, or if you felt like it was enforceable, do you feel like, is that something that would give you a little more comfort?
Well, of course, the issue that neighbors feel is, well, that doesn't help if 4 of those are all on my street.
Well, I have less tolerance for that. I mean, to me, it's like, okay, we're trying to meet you halfway here by giving a cap. So. But
I think you could do a cap by planning neighborhood or something,
Yeah, okay.
maybe.
which is how Arlington did it. Their cap is by zoning district, and I don't know exactly how their zoning districts disperse across the
Right.
city, but they dispersed their cap.
I think we have
a lot of what I'm hearing here is that I don't want my neighborhood to change, or the dramatic changes are frightening, et cetera. People move. I mean, the neighborhood I live in, without any zoning changes, has transformed completely in the last 20 years. Neighborhoods are gonna change. The question is, how do we want them to change? The people who live there are gonna change. I mean, there are relatively few, despite the aging population and aging in place, of people who have lived in their house, and this is where they moved in 30 years, and they've been there for all 30 years. I know there are plenty of them, but most people are not in houses for anything like that long, and the neighborhood and the population, the dynamics change over time. And I think that over a 10-year period, the people in the neighborhood are different people.
Mr. Schwartz?
I think we have a more fundamental problem in that we're considering if someone puts a townhouse development next to them, we're talking about it like it's a bad thing.
Right.
And I'm hoping, and actually I believe that the form-based code that we've been given, which actually I think is far too regimented, will result in what should be nice development. I don't think it would, if we're looking at this as, well, okay, if someone takes Rugby and 50% of the lots in that area get redeveloped in 5 years to be, max out the R3 zoning, if we're looking at that as a bad thing, then we have a problem just to begin with. So I think
Yeah.
we need to find a way that, we need to be comfortable with this code that, yeah, if next year, after we pass it, if every single one of these lots gets redone, we still have a good city. And I think that's what we're doing. I mean, I know that there's gonna be some mistakes, there's gonna be some things that we're gonna change in the zoning code, but you put townhouses next to someone's single-family house, it's supposed to work.
Right, and, one of my favorite articles I read in all of this is about, I can't think of, maybe in Charlotte or Raleigh, where they have a campaign called Neighbors for More Neighbors. Which I thought was just a cool slogan. And I would be delighted in my neighborhood to have more neighbors. That's not a problem. Not a universally held opinion. But, and I'm not, I don't want to be scornful of folks who have settled expectations. And people, I think, have a right to have settled expectations. We don't have to defer to every one of them, but we have to acknowledge them and not kick them in the face as we go by.
And I think to your earlier point about, massing and house size structures, I think a lot of people have concerns, and a lot of people's concerns are about, the scale of buildings, right? And I think we do need to keep hammering down on exactly what those look like in RC. And I think to that conversation you and Mr. Freeze had earlier, we have these three axes of control of that now, and I'm not entirely convinced they're totally, enough. I have been meaning to send this email, but I have not. But Rugby Avenue is actually the perfect point. I think it is the concern that they in particular are raising is, and it applies to Greenbrier as well, and not really to Belmont, is when you have these really big lots and you're doing things based on setbacks, you're still left with this giant buildable area. And then, the one thing we have restricting that, well, besides height, obviously, is width. But if you have a deep lot, it can still be a very large footprint building. Because, you have lot coverage to restrict the footprint of the building, but these are very big lots. And so they're not overly restricted. You've probably seen the graphic that the Rugby folks sent out. Not a perfect graphic, since that's a 34-unit building, but...
I've not seen that one.
Oh, well...
I saw one that's sent out by the folks over on Alderman Road, which is sort of the same thing, but anyway.
Don't know that one, but I mean, the building that Roy's email sent is not... It is a little bit,
okay, it's all right.
it's a little bit too wide. It would be violating the regulations, but you could shrink it a little bit. And obviously there's 34 units in it, so you couldn't have all those. You would have 8. But in theory, you could have 8 enormous units and build a building almost that big, just because it is so big of a lot. And you could do that now, right? You could build to the setback lines and 3 stories and a giant single-family house. People don't, because it's almost nonsensical. You'd have a ridiculous amount of interior space. But I think we could maybe add something like a maximum footprint rule in square feet in additional lot coverage, because if you reduce lot coverage, then you start having Belmont lots that are too tiny and end up with no buildable footprint that's usable. And so I think the way you take these concerns seriously is by, taking them seriously at its face value and addressing what the concerns are,
Yes.
which is that the scale of buildings could potentially, based on some of these rules, until we refine them, create outcomes we don't like, and make sure that the rules are set up so that the outcomes that could happen are ones, to Carl's point, that we would like, right?
And
Right.
if,
So you're making the presumption that with the density, you're gonna build more, like they're building in Albemarle County. Instead of me moving to Albemarle County, I'm gonna move to Charlottesville. And so because you have more people and the city grows, things are gonna get better for a certain group of people. So what are you gonna do with the other people that don't fit into that middle income? Because what you're saying is, now when people come to work at the university versus going to Waynesboro or Fluvanna or Louisa or Greene, they're gonna come to Charlottesville because we've built so that there are places for those individuals to live. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you find is that the people who move into the region for high-paying jobs, tend to live in the city or the close and urban ring because they have the
Right.
money for it.
Right.
And it's the people kind of here already that end up getting priced out and then
Right.
pushed out.
Right.
So you create that space for more people to stay,
Okay.
to have these lower priced homes for people to
Okay.
live in. You have
Okay.
subsidies that are going to people, at 40% below median and less
Okay.
in income. Because, you go back 5-6 years and council's talking about subsidizing people at 80, 100, 120% AMI in workforce housing.
Yep.
And I think that's, ridiculous. People at that level should be able to afford housing on their own here, and we should be spending our money towards people who actually need it.
And I agree. We
All
should
those go
be-
together.
I agree. We should be spending money.
But we've moved
toward-
away from the zoning
Yeah, now we're not
conversation.
talking
and-
about zoning.
Because
Right.
we have to understand too that the zoning will address the density problem.
Right.
That affects our affordability housing.
Yes.
Affordable housing, but does not solve the affordable housing.
Well,
And I'm not saying that it will solve the affordable housing, but what I'm saying is the conversation needs to be able to show how this is all an integral part, is an integral part.
Yeah.
I've never lived in a community until I moved to Charlottesville where there was no middle class. I grew up in a city in the Commonwealth of Virginia where there was a college in that town. We had a middle class, we had an upper middle class, we had people that were low income and subsidized, okay? So I am saying that if we're doing all that we're doing in zoning for density to help develop the middle class that we don't have, there has to be conversations held so that people understand we're doing this to get to that. And this isn't some trickle-down nonsense. We are doing this intentionally so others may live here. And that is not, and I'm not saying that that is not your intent. That is not what I'm saying. But I am saying the intent is not out there.
Yes.
So you're being disingenuous to the people that live out there, regardless of where they live. I've lived in townhouses, I've lived in condos, I've lived in apartments. There's nothing wrong with them. And if you're saying these are the things that are gonna bring more people to the city so they don't have to go hither, thither, and yonder, and by bringing more people to the city, we are intentionally doing that because this is going to protect another group of people, then we've got to say that. And we've got to be intentional about that. I don't care who you are. Change is hard. And you know why it is? Because nobody knows what it means. But if you're intentional about what you mean, if you're intentional about what you're trying to do, then you can get some buy-in.
Well said.
Yes.
Well, one, in my mind, and this is bigger than RB/RC, is the importance of tying this whole conversation to the strategies of land acquisition and community land trusts, which I really think is gonna be, what is gonna be the transformative thing for working class people more than anything, and being able to connect those things closely. And this is kind of a separate point, and that this is a really important conversation. So if we want to go back to that, drag me back. But one of the other conversations connected to that is a concern that in RB and RC, that the concern that particularly in some neighborhoods, you're going to get investors come in and build Airbnb or short-term rental units, and that you're not even actually going to get housing supply. And so just thinking about what specific policy questions can we actually answer, what are we doing now, and then what else can we do to, as much as we can, try to limit any of wherever our new supply is from being Airbnb, which we all know, particularly in neighborhoods around UVA, is very extreme.
We need to enforce our existing policy.
What is our existing policy?
That
Which we
don't
do.
allow- No, we don't.
That's new. We're doing it now.
No, we're not. Not on my street.
Are you turning them in? Because we're like gearing up for a court case on somebody, like we are doing piles of enforcement notices.
Sure, I happen to know the person professionally, so it's a little awkward,
Okay.
but.
So the rules are, it has to be owner occupied.
That's what I'm talking about.
And so in the residential districts, it has to be owner occupied in order to do an Airbnb.
There's a house right across the street from Liz, it's an Airbnb for sure.
There's an
Sure.
email in this Excel sheet that says they have an R3 Airbnb.
Yeah, yeah, yep.
So that's encouraging to hear.
Right, so we're doing that, but I think there's also, so we're looking at different rules, because there is a challenge with enforcing our rule right now, because it's based on owner occupancy, and how do you define owner occupancy?
Right.
So we are looking at other models of defining that limitation that are easier to enforce, so that's one track. But there is also there's also the notion of just outright not allowing Airbnb as a use in the residential districts.
Can we do that?
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
gonna, I think we should absolutely do that. And, given our tourism economy in UVA, we should err on the side as being as strict about short-term rentals as we can.
Would that be retroactive?
There are legal nonconformities exist, grandfathering exists within the zoning,
Don't we issue the licenses every year?
the licenses are issued every year. There are some existing right now within the city, though, that are grandfathered relative to our existing set of rules. So I'm not gonna just, I don't think, I'm not gonna just come out straight up and say they can be retroactive. I think the existing ones would have to stay under the existing body rules.
But even new is huge.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there are ways at the courthouse to determine, I mean, there's a not insignificant amount of outright fraud in acquisition of property for
But,
this purpose.
so we
there are
can-
ways to deal with it.
we can, this is a very important topic, but it sounds like there's at least potential areas for one of these concerns. Lloyd, do you feel like we've moved in any direction in terms of addressing the concern you had, if you were able to theoretically get to some kind of like limit to permits similar to Arlington? And then also, Leah, to your points, do you feel like we've really addressed those in any meaningful way? I'm just trying to figure out, like, what are the concrete things we can get to?
Because it's 8:30.
Yes.
I can't stay much longer. I almost feel like this is like, we've said a lot, and this has been a productive conversation. I was wondering if we should schedule a specific
Yeah, I
meeting
think
to
you need
talk
to
about this
stop.
topic.
We have not addressed any of the most complicated topics.
On what do you mean? You're referring to the map
Yes.
issues? Yeah, but I think, I'm gonna say, I think this was a very important conversation.
I agree. Could we follow up on the items we've not addressed this evening at a future work session?
Are we mainly talking about sort of like the idea of a permitted intensity behind, like an Arlington model? Are we talking about exploring that?
I mean, the notion that I think was on the table was exploring the notion that Arlington did, which was a cap on the number of projects under their missing middle zoning ordinance.
And are they far enough along? Will we be able to sort of track them as we go? Or are we too close to sort of see?
As far as, what's the question?
Well,
Sorry.
what I'm
Are
getting
they
at
far
is
enough
like,
ahead?
are they even gonna hit their cap? But it would be
We
something that
won't be
helps
able to
everybody.
learn from them.
No, they don't anticipate ever hitting their cap. That's their
Yeah, I mean,
anticipation,
it
but
seems-
their ordinance doesn't even go into effect until July 1.
Mm-hmm. But if a cap was something that assuaged fears, that's.
Which is why they adopted it.
And these are all extremely important, and we don't need to get into it tonight because I know we're way late. But the other one I would throw out there is the question of, and this is, in my mind, this is really more beyond even RB and RC, like RX, CX districts. What, if anything, systematically in terms of zoning designations on the map around areas with high percentage of low-income renters, not under sensitive area communities? Because I know I've already beat that drum to death, but I'll continue to do it. There's a very real risk of investors buying and consolidating lots, and renters with no existing protections will get screwed.
Absolutely.
And just, I know we can't solve that tonight, but.
The one that, oh, I should probably send this thing out that I sent to you.
And I
everyone
need
else,
to, I
but
need to meet with you, because you did send the best comprehensive way of looking at it that I've
The one that
seen.
really stood out to me there was the Cynthiana area that Gene Hyatt mentioned,
Mhm.
of the RB areas at least.
In what way?
Of a high percentage of
Mhm.
renter occupancy
Yep.
that aren't students.
Yep.
This is south of Preston near,
North of Preston,
Across
west
from
of the
Burley-
railroad
Across
tracks.
from Burley Middle School.
Yep.
That's Cynthia.
It's a very steep street going off to the right
Yep.
as you head
And
down.
then some mobile home park, obviously, but we've talked about that.
any other issues we want to address this evening? We can follow up on some of the items we weren't able to get to.
Is your
Try to figure
cadence
out.
now basically every other? Is the cadence now basically once a month or every other week to talk about the zoning
I don't know
rewrite?
that we have, I don't think we've defined a cadence at this point, so.
But it's
I
every
wonder if
other
we should-
week.
I wonder if we
To
should.
have a cadence of module 1, module 2.
Yes.
Yeah, we didn't even get to module 3.
Yes.
Well, I'm just wondering, going into the summer and going, and with the notion of getting this done, maybe we should just say we're gonna get together every other week and hash things out. And I think tonight, what we've made some headway on this one really thorny topic, and maybe with 2 weeks of thinking on it, we'll come back with a solid plan. But it does seem to me that if we're gonna pull this off this year or the end of the summer, we're gonna have to.
Up the op tempo.
Do we know what our planning commission meetings look like? I guess Missy's not here,
For
but,
the next couple, you mean?
yeah.
Very busy. Yeah, I'm hearing
Oh.
it's gonna be.
No, that's the wrong answer.
Oh, no, I'm good. You answered the questions that I had, because I didn't have any questions. I just wanted to make sure that what I needed to say was put out there for those of you that have done the work to consider.
Thank
I'm very fortunate to have been able to have afforded to live in the city of Charlottesville, and I don't take that for granted. But there are a lot of people that can't, and those are the people that I'm concerned about.
Right.
Whether they're middle class, whether they're getting pushed out, whether they're working class, it doesn't matter to me. I don't care who they are.
And to always be honest and explicit about who's left in and who's left out.
Right, and that is something that this city is very good at not doing. They're very good at not doing that, in not being explicit and putting it this way, and then when it all rolls out, it's not this way, it's something completely different. And if you're saying that you're responsible, and if you're saying that you care, then you can't be selling a pig in a poke. You just can't. You've got to stop. This is 2023. You've got to stop. You've got to be intentional about what you're doing. And you all have spent time developing this zoning plan. You were intentional about doing it. You did it for a reason. Everybody out there needs to understand the reason. They need to understand the intentionality. And all they see is words and pictures and graphs and words and pictures and graphs. And then what happens? We don't need another search firm or study or whatever. You need to put your money where your mouth is. Do what you say you're gonna do. And if it doesn't work, then you go back and you change it. Or you adjust it. But you just can't keep talking and talking and talking and talking and nothing ever happens. It's not fair to anybody around this table. It's not fair to anybody that's listening. And it's not fair to anyone that lives here, whether you're a renter or a homeowner. It's just not fair. And you've got to start doing what's right. And what's right is hard. And what's right may not be fair to everybody.
It may not feel fair to a lot of people.
So we've been banging our head against this wall for at least 3 months now. And it's all been revolved around the R's, the R, A, B, and C's. We really need to land the plane one way or the other, not have to get together on the R, A, B's, and C's.
Right.
There were 3 things that we talked about to help these 2 folks get comfortable with the R, A's, B's, and C's. One was metering the supply. That's one idea that you came up with, Brian. Meter the supply. So do it in increments. Every couple of years you do this, that many. The other was cap development by zoning districts, or cap development by neighborhoods. So that's the second idea that Carl came up with. Or one that went before. And the other
It's one of them.
And the other was maybe you that said limit the footprint in the neighborhoods. So those were really the only 3 ideas that were presented today. That were,
And banning Airbnbs.
Limit the size of the buildings in some way.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Different,
sorry. Yeah. So those were the 3 things that we talked about. So hopefully we can get you guys comfortable with one of those 3 things, or a combination of them.
I'm good with them. I'm good with them. I said what I needed to say. I'm good with what you just said.
But I just want to, I've been here with you guys before, and I don't want to end up having another leader leave. I do not want to leave another meeting frustrated.
I'm not frustrated. Let me
Well,
tell
I
you.
am.
Well, I'm not, because if I was, I wouldn't still be sitting here.
But again, we've been here before, and I met with you individually, I met with you individually.
And I'm good.
Thought we were getting close to an answer, but we haven't. So those are the 3 things we got, guys. So let's land the ball next time we get together.
One idea for maybe some more comfort, I don't know if this is somewhere in the city's budget, and we had a bunch of architects look at different zones, but they picked the zones that they were already working on, and we failed in the sense that, or I failed in getting people to look at RA, RB, and RC. And I'm wondering if there might be some budget to get some people to actually look at individual lots around the city in the RBs or Cs.
We are still, we're looking at a presentation that's gonna kind of walk through how you get from the zoning to a building. Same, the people who are gonna do that right now are focused in on getting module 3 done.
Okay.
So after tomorrow, they'll be working on that. What's the
After
ETA on
tomorrow,
that?
the time frees up.
Because it would be nice to
Do
see,
we have an estimate?
really, like, what could
I
go
don't.
on these lots.
Makes sense.
Have I sent you the UVA project on that?
Oh,
If
yeah.
you did, I must have,
Look
I
at
think
that.
you did a long
It's
time ago.
For that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Mitchell, I am not frustrated. I'm sorry that you are, but I'm good. And all of the work that you've done to help me understand that is fine. And I just wanted everyone else around the table to know how I was feeling. I wasn't elected, I was appointed, but I have a responsibility. And you know how I feel, and Mr. Freeze knows how I feel, but everybody else needed to hear it. And I'm done. I'm good. Let's keep this train a-moving. We've got something to do. There has been a plan set out, and there are dates that the commission has and that the city council has, and we've got to adhere to those dates. And we don't need to back up from it. Keep going.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chair, Mr. Freeze, I think there would be great value in the next get-together, the focus being on just landing the plane on the R's. Because that is the most controversial piece we've got. The other thing, technical pieces are complicated, but I don't think that they're going to be as complicated, as controversial as this. And yeah, something you said, Lloyd, that made sense to me, you gotta listen to it.
Something,
You gotta
one
hear
thing.
it. no matter what you do, you gotta make sure that the people feel heard, and you're getting that in your ear every day, and you want to make sure that they know that they're being heard by the rest of us, and not just you.
And that's important.
Yeah.
And everything that he said, he has said on our listserv, verbally and in writing. So he's not backing down, but he's sharing with you how people are feeling. Just like our commissioner here, sharing how Ms. Hyatt feels. And so you need to know.
I would entertain a motion at this time.
I have one.
Oh, no.
It's not that easy.
I have
I
one.
guess it would be for two of us around the table, the others of you, I don't know.
Mr. Chair, today is World Turtle Day. And I would suggest that we adjourn, giving no deference to that whatsoever in the manner and speed of our departure, since we are an hour and 47 minutes later than we thought we were.
So, do I hear a second?
Second.
I hear a second. All in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all.
That was good, Russ.